And it was on now.
There we go.
Try you or would you?
Yeah, Lauren. Ladies and gentlemen, just before we start off, may I say again, and I'll put on record, that I'm disappointed that Sinn Féin are not taking part in this committee meeting. Bearing in mind Sinn Féin made themselves available to the PAC yesterday. I think it's a derogation of duty, but I think we as a committee will be able to work through in the spirit of getting to the bottom of this and finding out what's best for the people of Northern Ireland going forward. I would like to emphasise, and I know I'm going to ask Peter to say a few words. Hi Andrew, come on in. The key to this is to talk about the issues to do around the business plan, particularly those, and then get evidence from RHA NI so that we can take a fullest picture as possible of what is going on. And first of all, before we start, may I welcome Laura McWilliams. Laura, who's an intern working with me this week from the great school of Ballyclare High School. That's Ballyclare High School in South Antrim, just so I could re-emphasise that several times.
Is there an election?
There might be, Gordon. There might be in the rest of it. But welcome, and welcome to everybody else. Ladies and gentlemen, the meeting is now open to the public. To remind you again that no photographs or recordings can be taken in the meeting. The meeting will be in camera. We have received apologies from Conor Murphy, Alex Maskey, Cuivar Archibald and from Mervyn going forward.
Can I just clarify, what are the apologies actually for?
Not being here. Essentially, yes. I did speak to the chair on apologies.
Well, apology implies a great contrition that you are regretting if it's deliberate.
You were trying to make a comment through the chair, Dr. Farry, about sort of contrition from Sinn Féin. We might put that on the record. I'll sure do that through. Yeah, I'd just like Peter to say a few words before we start.
Members, just to remind the committee that we had asked Dr. McCormick and colleagues up to talk about the SR business case, issues around the SR, issues around the business case. I appreciate that Dr. McCormick had a very long session with PAC yesterday, but getting away from that is the PAC inquiry, and this committee has already recognised the primacy of the PAC in that inquiry that they're undertaking. It's just to emphasise this session was designed around the statutory rule that is in front of the committee and also the business plan that supports that statutory rule.
Okay, and before we start, I will not be asking the questions I posed on the No Lunch show this morning, so you'll be quite happy with that, Andrew. But Stephen, you must have the most unthankful task of anybody in Northern Ireland, but welcome and come along to that. And Shane, welcome as well. And just for those who don't know, Stephen McMurray, you are the RHI Task Force leader.
Yes, indeed.
You must have been standing in the wrong place at the wrong time and somebody volunteered you.
Must have committed a sin in a previous life.
I think the key here, please, Andrew, just as we start off, one of the reasons we want you here is to talk about the business plan. And I particularly want to talk about the business plan going forward and specifically at any of the alternatives you looked at. Because one of the things we will be considering, whether there's issues to do with the windfall tax, whether there's been some issues to do, rateable issues of going forward. The other issue is, as you've been aware, we've had a legal briefing just before that. And what I would like to hear from you is your view on the legal risks and the potential legal risk going forward. The business case we've already talking about. And one of the other issues that has been raised is, bearing in mind we've already had 1 year of 30 million being spent, is there any process of recovering that money, excess money from what should have been from the scheme going forward? And those are the sort of the points I would like to open up with, and then over to you, Andrew, and over to the team.
Okay, well, thanks, Acting Chair, and thanks for the opportunity to do this. And what I'll really ask in a moment is to ask Shane to talk through the analysis within the business case, including, as you've asked, the options that were considered and the bones of the analysis, the appraisal of those options that takes us towards the recommendation that emerged in the business case. So I think that's what Shane can do with the economic expertise that he brings to that. In terms of just big picture perspective, as I said at I did get one chance to talk about this at the PAC yesterday, and I was actually following on from the question you'd asked me on Monday, and then you touched on this on Saturday as well, as to the issue of ministerial direction.
Yeah.
And what I said to the PAC is, on the contrary, not to do this would probably require ministerial direction. Now that's a slightly contrived point, because there's no such provision, but for a ministerial direction for inaction. But I make that rhetorically, almost to emphasise that the imperative I'm under as accounting officer is to secure value for money, regularity, and propriety of expenditure. And as we stand, 16-17, the expenditure on RHI will be irregular, not because it wasn't approved. Some of it was approved by the Department of Finance, but that's not the only condition. Regularity also requires, if you look at managing public money, regularity requires that there is adequate control. And as we stand, as is well known, there is not adequate control. So my obligation as accounting officer is to take action to secure that. And one key to this whole analysis is that we have not found a quicker or better option to move towards regularity in relation to this expenditure. So that's one reason we regard this as urgent and imperative.
Andrew, just another point there. We talk about sort of you're the accounting officer for the Northern Ireland side of the funding. But for the AME,
AME, I'm also the accounting officer for the AME.
So you're accounting officer for both what is coming from...
Has to be, yes. That's, again, part of the fallacy that crept in all of this. You know, this is free money. Treasury will pay. That's, in terms of my responsibilities as accounting officer, that's totally irrelevant. I'm accountable for the whole lot, and my accounts cover the whole lot.
So so just to clarify this, you're accounting both to the Northern Ireland Executive and to HM Treasury?
Well, all of it goes through the Assembly request for resources process, so it's all approved by the Assembly.
It's all on the vote.
The budget bill is all on the vote.
Yeah.
So in that sense, the accounting officer role is purely within Northern Ireland. I do have to say that HM Treasury has noticed. They read the Northern Ireland newspapers.
I'm sure they have.
They have noticed this and are very concerned, and there's a bit of a postbag into their ministers, into Bay's ministers, saying what's going on here, given the contribution from UK taxpayers through the subvention to Northern Ireland. So that there is concern in London, and therefore we do have de facto a responsibility to act and secure control of public expenditure. So
just for clarification, Andrew, have you received a letter from the Secretary of the Treasury or any direction from HMG?
No, we haven't, but we are aware of concerns informally. Okay. So that's my perspective as accounting officer, and strong reasons to back the approach. I may just draw attention in terms of the appraisal of the business case. One of the suggestions that came to me from Department of Finance, as they were considering it last week, was would it be a good idea, given we are moving at pace, would it be possible to secure an independent opinion on the business case? So we approached, the Minister mentioned this briefly on Monday, but just to elaborate slightly, we approached a colleague called Bob Hanna, who does some independent work, and he's doing this work in an independent capacity, but he is the Chief Technical Advisor to the Department BCCAE. I'm sorry, the acronym I lose.
In the Irish Republic.
In Dublin.
I know both.
But the Energy Department in Dublin. So he has told us that the documents constitute a very good and complete analysis of the current situation and possible early-term courses of action, albeit that it is recognised that this had to take place over a very short period of time and with quite limited data. The documents are extremely well prepared. There are a small number of typos and grammatical issues, but nothing substantial, and the conclusions are logically drawn and the recommendations well stated. So we have that independent scrutiny over the past weekend. Again, so he's done an urgent piece of work for us, but that's totally independent expert advice on the quality of the work.
Could we have a copy of that, or through the clerk?
This is subject to the Minister, yes. If the Minister is content, we'll get you.
I'm sure the Minister will be content.
That's important.
So then, if I may touch briefly on the legal issues, I'm not sure there's much I can do by way of expansion on what the Minister said in the Chamber on Monday. We've analysed this on the basis of two main potential lines of challenge, which are a general one in relation to legitimate expectations, where we go back to the fact that the expectations created at the time of the launch of the scheme were very clear and stated the nature of the incentive that was being drawn together. And there are a number of references and documents, both in Hansard and in documents that were produced in 2012, that indicated that the expectation was that the rate of return that would apply to beneficiaries of this scheme would be of the order of 12%. And the basis for that, as Shane can explain this in more detail, that's the kind of expectation that needs to be in place to incentivise an investment in something which is unusual or novel. So that's good economics in that sense.
What was the one of the questions that's come out? So the incentivisation, and Shane, maybe you could talk to this, incentivisation for other renewables and sort of the likely return, because one of the things that seems to be out of step was the incentivisation for the renewable heat scheme against incentivisation process for other sort of renewables. But if you could just address that when you're talking through.
My understanding of the logic was this is about incentivising renewables compared to what a business would otherwise do. So yes, exactly. A business could choose to continue with his oil boiler for his heat, let's say it's heating an office, and they could choose to invest their capital in another activity. So this isn't necessarily, the benchmark isn't necessarily an investment in different types of energy systems and what are the returns for energy investments. This was to incentivise businesses to use their capital in order to change their boiler system compared to what other investments they might have done by just keeping their oil boiler, or by the difference between oil boilers and biomass boilers is very substantial. And so that was the logic, and so that was the logic of a commercial orientated rate of return was likely to be required. You could argue the toss about whether 12% was the right number. So
the incentive was, just for my own clarity here, so the incentive was for the replacement of existing systems?
Yeah, or if someone was building an hotel or something, that they would choose a renewable boiler over and above an oil boiler. And the idea of the tariff was that it would cover the additional investment and the additional operating costs by way of a tariff-based system. So it wasn't for the entire cost of the oil boiler, and it wasn't for the entire the entire cost of the biomass boiler or geothermal system, or it wasn't for the entire operating cost, it was for the additional cost, because again the logic was these should be existing or businesses. They will have a heat demand, which is normal part of the course of a business. So if it's it's a leisure centre, they'll have a swimming pool, they need to heat the swimming pool anyway, and it only makes sense for them they need a boiler of some sort in order to generate revenues for their business. Someone who's got an office block, if they want to have tenants, they need to have a heating system. So that's just part of their normal course of business and their normal income and outgoings. And so, given that it was potentially going to be more expensive to go green, the idea of the tariff was to cover the extra of that. And that's very important, because that's sometimes lost.
But it was only for the heating, it wasn't for anything additional to that, it was just for heating? It
was for heating, and the tariff is based on heat output from boilers.
So, again, just to come back to a point that was made in the Chamber on Monday as well, I've stated that in terms of a very clear statement of intention. So the problem with this is a mismatch between intention and delivery. The mistake was made in designing the system and the over-generous tariff. That was not intended. Indeed, it wasn't understood and spotted. I explained this at length yesterday as to the nature of the mistakes that were made within the department and the responsibility we have to take as civil servants for the detrimental flaws in that design. But no one can say that there was any intention to provide anything more generous. That's an important point which goes to the legal advice. The second main potential ground of challenge, as the Minister explained, is in relation to Article and Protocol 1 of the European Convention on Human Rights and the right to property. And the clear advice from our senior lawyers is that the right to property in this context, in the context of future income, is very different from the right to property in relation to existing property. and also that the A1P1 contains a specific reference to the public interest, so that there is a power. It says there's a need not to interfere with people's property except in the public interest. So the exception is explicitly there in A1P1 for that to be done. And the argument that is clearly behind this proposal is that the public interest is not being served by the excessive compensation that is going to beneficiaries of the scheme through the existing tariff. So the legal advice we have is very clear and robust, and we're very confident that the case is there. So I think I've touched briefly on your main points. Acting Chair, is it best to let Shane expand on the analysis of options and the basis of the recommendation?
Yeah. I'll also start by talking about the sort of the driver of actions, because I think there appears to be at times a mixing up between abuse and overcompensation, and it's been seen to be one and the same thing. That the only issue with this scheme is abusers, and if that went away, the scheme would be fine. That is absolutely not the case. So, in terms of drivers for action, I'm going to start with overcompensation. I might dwell on this a bit longer than I will other things, because we could well return to this. The tariff that was set initially within the SEPA work was based upon a 50 kilowatt boiler running 17% of the time. It was envisaging, sort of modernised office blocks with office hours driving the heat loads.
And that was from the original.
That was from the very
That was the original deck deciding when it was in the GB scheme. It was based on that. So,
but what came along was not 50 kilowatt boilers, but 99. So there, you're already doubling the heat load assumption there. And what came along was not 17% load factor, but something like 40 to 45% load factor. So you're talking about the heat load assumption was out by a factor of about 5. And so there was less offices and far more industrial processes which were coming along, and so the load and size of boiler were much greater, and as a result, the tiering has been talked about a lot in terms of cost control. Its biggest function is actually regulating rate of return. The rate of return goes up into the tier and then starts to flatten out, and so it can flatten out around about the 12% mark. But without tiering, as loads go up, the rate of return keeps rising, and so the rates of return that turn out in practice for far too many people are 30, 40, 50+% rates of return. Very, very significant. And again, we can come back to this later. I can give you more evidence, but so overcompensation is a key driver. This leads to.
So, could you go more? Sorry, I just want to sort of check something. The standard sort of boiler at the time was somewhere around about 50 kilowatts, somewhere around about there.
That was assumed, yeah.
Yeah, that was assumed because those were the industry standard.
Yeah.
But it's the 99 kilowatts.
That was the most popular boiler by a long stretch that was actually put in that tariff band.
And sort of in GB, it was mostly 50 kilowatt boilers, wasn't it?
Sorry?
In GB, it was mostly 50 kilowatt.
I don't know what was actually installed in GB, but certainly the analysis was anticipating that something like a 50 kilowatt boiler would be the typical.
So it's actually quite a natural behavioural response that businesses would say, well, we'll get this high tariff for a bigger boiler. Let's get as big a boiler as possible to maximise the tariff. It's quite a logical commercial response. And indeed, we have this phenomenon of multiple boilers. So 8 99s where one really big one would do.
Yeah,
that's part of the whole way this has worked. People
yeah, sure.
It's
just a quick question. Yeah. You talked there about the returns. Now, the layman's hearing about every pound you put in, you get £1.60 back. That's the story going around with the layman. Was it only the abusers that were getting that return?
No.
Was everyone getting that return?
No. Again, do not. Abusers are a subset of the overcompensated. As an illustration of the profile, around about, for this tariff, the tier is set at 15%. That will, on our calculation, broadly speaking, deliver a 12% return on the additional investment and operating environment for a biomass boiler. So, of the profile of applicants that we have sufficient data on, some of them haven't logged invoices and usage and so forth, somewhere around about 15% of applicants are currently running their boiler, it looks like, at load factors at or at less than 15%. So those 15% are earning no more than 12% or so. And then for the next 85%, you move from some sort of minor or marginal overcompensation right up to the other end where they're earning multiple rates of return. We reckon about 70% are outside the range that we told the European Commission. So those are where there's the most serious rates of return in terms of being out of kilter. And we would also gauge that probably about 10% have earned so much to date that if you sort of like just cut off their payments completely, you would still need some retrospective action to get them back into kilter.
Okay. Gordon, you want a point of clarification?
The point was, there was no pre-approval system in place for the boilers. So is it possible that they brought the 99 kilowatt units in, almost setting their own specification, the suppliers, rather than a pre-approved specification?
I'm not sufficiently technically orientated to answer such a
But
question.
it was the case that there was no pre-approval. You went ahead and installed the boiler and then you applied then to get it approved. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that is the case. However, there is a stage of testing between installation, application and accreditation. So what happens is Ofgem look at the application, look at the schematic and the diagrams that are provided to show what is this installation doing, what's it there for. The typical pattern is that they would have several exchanges with the applicant to clarify points of information. They then, assuming it all is well, then accredit, and the payments are backdated to the date of application. So the date of application is still the determining point in relation to expenditure, but the process of approval. So that's why there are still a number of cases in the pipeline of people who have applied before the scheme was suspended in the end of February, who are still in the process of consideration by Ofgem. But they will still get payments backdated to the.
But they have to go through an accreditation.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
Sorry.
there was no pre-approval system.
No.
Okay. Sinead,
Just
point
on
of clarification.
That, can I also, it might seem an obvious
Separate
question, but
cases.
can I also ask, how is that measured? How, if I have a boiler, how do I tell you how much heat I've generated? How do you determine what was above what I would have generated in my business anyway, as you described? And do I physically give you a copy of an invoice for the burning material that I've used? Or how is that? What is that system?
I'm not sure any of us here are familiar with all the precise details of how Ofgem do that, but certainly there's a requirement to submit metered readings. Meter readings is part of the process, and part of the test then we have to look at in terms of our inspection, enforcement and audit process is to ensure that there's a verification process. So I think there's two stages probably in your question there. There's what is required by way of information at the point of application, and that's where they need to understand the design of the boiler, and then also to get information on the purpose for which the heat is being generated, and then that'll look at boiler size and proposed load factor, and what proportion of the day is going to be used from, be it 17% if we're talking about a sort of classic working day, or up to the kind of usage that the poultry industry needs. So all that information comes in, and there isn't a single definition of excess in that context. So that's why in going forward, looking at enforcement and inspection, we'll have to design and specify exactly what do we mean by excess. That's what we have to. That's part of the process we're now in. Sorry.
We'll touch on some sort of attempts in the business case to try and gauge what that might mean for expenditure as well. So overcompensation as a driver feeds through to overcommitment. AME budget next year of somewhere a bit over 22 million, nowhere near on track unless we change. No, we'll be closer to 50 million. And
Sorry,
so,
excuse me?
if we don't, without any change, without this course of action, we'll be something like a 50 million cost for domestic and non-domestic RHI next year, of which just over 22 million is available from AME.
Okay.
So 28 million potential overtime.
So there's a big budget driver there as well. And the third driver is undesirable behaviours, whether that be, you'll have heard about those before, so I don't want to list those again. And that leads to pretty poor value for money, and there's obviously been much public concern. So those are the drivers. The objective for the business case was to undertake a legally defensible course of action that, starting next year, can remove the perverse incentive to produce excessive heat. And the options that were looked at, again, there's been work done on longer term options, but the conclusion was, at this here and now, they're not sufficiently developed. Bear in mind, you've been setting something for 18 to 20 years. They're not at a stage with a full level of assurance on legal terms, on incentive terms, on budgetary terms, that you would take the plunge without crossing your fingers. So the conclusion was, what's available to us as a first step to get the excesses of the scheme back to normal standards, or as far as we can within the incoming year. That led to standard options of, well, we can continue as we are, something of the order of £50 million. We can take something that's off the shelf and that's known to the industry and that is grounded in the logic of the scheme. Come back to the other legal points. That's the post-November 2015 tariff structure. And then there was an option of suspending the entire non-domestic payments for the incoming year, and options in between which involved fairly arbitrary reductions in tariffs, whether that be budget-driven or by some arbitrary process. And in the main, the concentration comes down to a choice between staying where we are, which overcompensates, is basically taking money out of the block and paying people supernormal profits. That's pretty much what it is. And continuing poor behaviours, or do we take some action? Then the question becomes the severity of that action and how well it gets us within budget for next year. Superimposing the November 15 tariffs onto those installations that were there beforehand can get you, for the incoming year, budget-wise, it'll get you somewhere around about 24 to 25 million, depending on how much behavioural change is incentivised. I'll talk about that in a minute.
But just to clarify, 24, 25 million, even if there isn't any behavioural change, it would be.
No, we've got some variations in it, but with some behavioural change, we've got it around about 24 and a half or so, and without behavioural change, a bit over 25.
Right.
I'll come back to behavioural change in a minute, because
Yeah.
I don't want to be taking that as a fact that that's the cost of behaviours. Just bear with me. There were the other option, which is probably on the table as well, which would be one that was reverse engineered from the budget to deliver something which would keep you within the AME allocation of just over 22 million. That's where the key choice comes. So do you go with an off-the-shelf set of tariffs that was publicly grounded in the logic of the scheme and could be used to aid your defence, or do you risk going for the extra 1 or 2 million financial gain with a potential reduction in the legal strength of your case? That was the choice.
So one of the big drivers is obviously legality. How much is it going to be challenged?
Yeah.
So if it's going to be challenged, there will be legal challenge, but the question is, what would be the worst case option?
Yeah. Whether
Best available.
is it worth going for the extra 1 or 2 million for the extra legal risk? And that is the judgment inherent.
And sorry, I suppose, Shane, it's
In the business.
intention is getting us back to the original policy intention that the scheme was about in the first place.
Yeah. Within the business case, we've also looked at there would be, it might be reasonable to expect that by bringing in the tier and by bringing in the cap, that there would be some sort of change in behaviours. Certainly, there would be the incentive to burn above the tier when you didn't need the heat should pretty much plummet or disappear. So the question will be, how much of that heat and loads currently there are truly not needed or wouldn't be needed with some adjustment, and whether the heat loads will start to gravitate towards the levels of the tier and the levels of the cap. So there was some endeavour based on part logic, part guesswork, to try and model an outcome where heat loads started to gravitate towards 13, 14 hours in terms of the tier and 400,000 kilowatt hours the cap. And that is the lower figure, the 24-odd million figure that we're talking about now. Let's be very clear, that is it's a logic-driven scenario. It's not driven on any data that we have, because we don't have data. In a year's time, if this tariff operates for a year, we will be able to gauge what the behavioural fact seems to have been from from looking at installations usage beforehand and afterwards. And so,
I'm quite shocked to hear that you don't have any data.
No. We don't have any data post behavioural change.
Yeah.
We've got data on current behaviours, but we don't know what within that data which is good behaviour and which is bad behaviour. We don't know which is which. But if we had
just to confirm the assumption, and I'm getting quite nervous here. You're talking about logic, guesswork, and no data about looking forward.
No. That relates to, we have an estimate of around about 25 million next year, which is based on no behavioural change.
Right.
So the patterns of consumption in previous years are repeated in future years.
Well, it's only been running for a year.
No, we have some applicants that we have 3 years, 2 or 3 years.
So you've the data for that, but at the increased rate since 2015 from the spike and going forward, what data sets do you have for that?
For the November tariffs?
Yeah.
Reduced tariff.
We don't have as much data because that came in later. So we don't have the same amount of data for those in those tariffs that we have for those in the earlier tariffs. A lot of times that information, those installations are still getting accredited. Until they get accredited, they can't put in invoices. Until there's invoices, there's no usage data. So we have very limited data on those that have this tariff in place. And so as a result, there isn't a means to nicely model what a before and after looks like on usage. The range isn't that large though, because in the new tariff structure, if there's a gravitation towards the cap, the 400,000 cap, well, that might be useful in terms of policy outcomes. It doesn't save any money because it's at 0 pence. Everything beyond the cap is at 0p. At the tier, a gravitation towards the tier saves 1.5 pence per kilowatt hour. So it's not truckloads of money. The big thing that delivers A, rate of return regulation, and B, cost saving, is the existence of the tier itself. Exactly. That is the big factor which takes this down from 50 odd million to half or a fraction less.
So any exercise like this involves using empirical evidence in terms of past behaviour and projections forward involving a range of assumptions. So let me say something risky. It's a well-known fact that all financial models are wrong, but some are useful. This is useful. This is a useful analysis.
Tell me, Andrew, I worked for the Ministry of Defence before. I'm well aware of
the level of
models.
detail. The numbers will not turn out exactly as projected. That's certain. But this gives as good an indication as it's possible to get as to how future behaviour will run. And we are also clear that without this, the present way of doing things is easier to model and easier to project, and it's exactly as we have it now, which is excess heat. So the case for doing this is as well founded as it could be in terms of doing something which is for 1 year. Going back to what Shane said about the objectives, this is not trying to design the perfect model that will last for 20 years. We need to take that task on because we need for April 18 a more stable permanent solution, and we need to buy time to let that happen. The beauty of this is that it introduces clear control straight away. So back to my urgent need for regularity in expenditure, need for value for money, the need for some degree of restoration of confidence through people no longer having an incentive to burn to earn. So the case, that's to me the summary of the case. Shane, have I interrupted your flow?
No, that was pretty much
of your time.
So I suppose, Chair, tied in with that is the idea of 100% inspections and the information that we get from that, and that will influence us as well, to provide a whole new data set for us.
It's important to note
that's being used.
Those figures do not involve any presumption about, so if there are 50, 75 installations, which, whatever it might be, I don't know what the number might be, whatever number of installations the inspection regime might pick up and discard from the scheme or remove from the scheme, again, that is not part of that figure work.
Again, part of when I was talking to the team about this business case in the course of the last couple of weeks, because it is only that period we've been doing it, I was asking the question, how much can we get? How much more reduction would it be likely to secure through a highly effective inspection, audit and fraud prevention regime? And the recommendation was to adopt not a conservative or safe figure, but a prudent mid-range figure is a million or so of possible savings. So when Moy Park or others claim that all you have to do is come down on fraud, that simply is not the case. There is no evidence whatsoever that would be sufficient to make a difference. Yes, we need separately to pursue the 100% inspection and bear down on each and every case where there is abuse or fraud. This
is the difference between abuse and overcompensation.
Exactly, that's exactly Shane's point.
Yeah.
And I'm very conscious of time, and I know some people want to come in, but just and I'll ask a quiet. You said there you've only been working on this business plan for a couple of weeks.
Yes.
So the minister categorically told us in July that he was looking
at
this
particular business case. We examined a range of options, and we indeed, as I said, the PAC yesterday, we had consultation papers worked up in September, October time on other options, which were full and complete long-term solutions. Then, as I was saying to the committee yesterday, we spent some time looking very hard at the closure option, especially in November and December. Those are all dealing with solutions that would have been long-term and permanent. The particular task in the last few weeks has been come up with a short-term solution that would bear down immediately, and that was just an evolving set of considerations. As for example, as the closure option had been exposed publicly before Christmas, and there was a lot of criticism and concern about potential loss of the future Amy, because we don't want to lose. Yes, it's still beneficial to Northern Ireland to have the flow of that resource. It's our 3% share of what is going on for renewable heat across the water. It's right to try to continue to make use of that. So all those considerations came in, and hence the work that's been done. So there's been extensive work, and again, some degree of consultation. We probably could have written more to the Department of Finance in the course of the autumn, but as a matter of fact, we are where we are. We've got a very, very defensible and very viable proposal.
Okay. So what date did you start this revised business plan on?
The 30th of December.
30th of December. Okay.
You should be aware, though, that because the core of this business plan is superimposing the November 15 tariffs, that was part of the options and work that was also done earlier in the autumn.
That's right.
So that modelling work that was done in whatever September, October, November was then refined further
Jane,
in that last 2 week period.
That's fine. We fully understand that. Stephen?
Thanks, Chair. Just to pick up from that point, but just before I get into the specific questions, to say, look, I think these exchanges are useful, and what you're setting out is, as is explained, the process of reassurance is ongoing. I think the pity is we're so tight in terms of timescales around all of this. That leads me into, I think, the first point I want to make, which is around the timescales. What is, in essence, a paradox that we're hearing in terms of what's been said, and I think is causing us concern, and it's probably feeding our frustration in terms of the current context. On the one hand, you're telling us that you're going for what is, in effect, the off-the-shelf approach, the easiest, most simplistic off-the-shelf approach. This is designed to be a one-year patch to allow for a wider public consultation and a wider policy process around what is going to be a much more long-term sustainable process. That then begs the question, doing this from a standing start in the autumn or even at the end of December, why this particular process could not have been initiated in June and reach a point that regulations were before the Executive and before the Assembly in early September. I cannot get my head around why we are where we are.
I did comment on this yesterday as well, because I think the truth is that for a fair bit of last year, we were limited by the view that we thought that the commitments, the grandfathering concept, the commitment was could not be overcome. We had to take it took us some time to realise actually that there were grounds to challenge the illegitimate expectations point. So we've been probably too limited in our thinking, and so you can't do something before you think of it. Is the honest answer to your question. This was the thought of doing it this way only came to us over the Christmas period. Yeah. So you can't. That's just a human explanation. Yes. We thought of it, and in fairness, it was coming from special advisors.
There's a saying: sometimes the most obvious solution is just in front of your nose at times, and so it's a case of that. But nonetheless, it is frustrating for us, and it doesn't really help us in terms of our process in that regard. In that spirit, Andrew. Could you could you maybe give us an indication of, is there a preferred view at this stage, even a preliminary view, as to what is going to be, or what the department's view is of the best longer-term solution? So to give us an idea as to what the trajectory in this is going to be.
Well, obviously wary of saying anything that might indicate a prejudgment of consultation process. That's part of how we regularise this. Yes. I think it's not unreasonable to say that this does look quite good for the longer term. Actually continuing with exactly this tariff for the longer term might be quite a good idea. I think we have to really stress test that and look at the implications. We'll have a lot more data to consider from behaviour. We'll understand the behaviours. Also, we will have, in the course of the next few months, the emerging progress on inspection and so on. So all of that will feed into a consideration of those future options. Yeah. But certainly, I think I said yesterday, I was highly attracted to the closure option for accounting officer reasons, because it kills the abuse like that. It just wipes it out instantly, and would have been very attractive, and would have left us with no question marks. This deals with a lot of the problems, but it doesn't instantly deal with.
Could I just interject? Andrew, I know that you're under time pressure, but I also know this is vitally important. If I ask for your indulgence for another 10 to 15 minutes from your time, you said, so we could, I would guarantee you'd be out of here at 4:45.
I'm just not sure yet if the meeting I've been trying to organise is working, and it is quite an important meeting. So if someone could check with Siobhan Tweedy and establish if the 4:30 is confirmed, that'd be helpful. I've got my devices turned off.
We get our team to, I'm assuming we can get that from the ministerial office upstairs, or?
I don't know her number, it's just in my phone.
On the network.
Actually, if you call 29441, Laura McCoy in my office will.
2944.
Michael, if you liaise with the Dallo, that'll probably be.
I'll pick up the PSN as well.
And if we could, because I know everybody wants, I've got 3 more to speak. So.
Maybe get to two group this into maybe 3 broad areas then. First of all, in terms of maybe Shane could outline for us what are the risks in terms of this approach that have been cited in the business case, to give us a picture in terms of this is the preferred outcome in terms of the cleanest, most effective way in the short run to address the overspend. Is it also that these risky, or are there more risk with this approach in terms of others?
Well, the least risky approach is to do nothing, but then that costs us 25+ million quid next year, which I don't think anyone around this table is keen to live with. So that's and there was a description earlier about the legal defence for this type of move.
Yes.
There were risks in the business case around operational risk. So, putting the tariffs into regulation is all fine and dandy, but can Ofgem operationalise them? And Stephen could probably say more about that, but my understanding is comfort has come from Ofgem that they actually can put this through the computer systems and deal with the operational aspects of that. It's very easy to think that this is just changing something in a computer and Bob's your uncle. It is much more complicated than that in their process, but that assurance is there. Clearly, legal risks have been talked about.
What about European Commission risks?
The European Commission
is that said as a legal risk or as a compliance risk?
It's a separate process.
Do you want to?
I can take it if that's okay. I had a discussion with the Commission in December when we were exploring the closure option, and the message they gave us then was that if closure of course would have been accompanied by compensation, if the compensation was equivalent to the entitlement of the individuals under UK law, then that would not be aid, and therefore there's no process required whatsoever. That to me was another reason for thinking about that as quite a good idea. However, what they also made very clear was that any other proposal would be notifiable.
Yes.
Now, the rules, the process with the Commission on state aid is that what they like to happen is pre-notification. So a member state sends a paper explaining the proposal, and that allows for there to be discussion and testing of the idea with Commission officials, and then only when that's been through a process and a good understanding has been secured, do you move to the formal process of notification. And that's significant because once a formal notification goes in, then the Commission has 2 months in which to take a decision. So you'll now be picking up the significance of the timing. We still would like to keep on good terms with DG Comp and ensure that there's a goodwill towards the process, and that I think that is probably one of those situations where the least said the better, given one or two of the other things that have happened in the last few months. So therefore the proposal is to have an early discussion with them, but that's best after and subject to the Assembly approving. Then we've got a clarity of role here, and we would ideally move to notification immediately, and therefore have a hopeful expectation of a decision before the end of March. But we couldn't take a chance on that. So hence the formulation in the regulations that says 1st of April or notification.
Sorry, Andrew, that actually ties in neatly with Ofgem, because giving them that window and it gives them enough time, Stephen, to make those changes. So they've given us that assurance.
Final question just relates to, it's probably a two-part question, just to be absolutely honest about it, but relates to the issue of the core issue, which is of excessive profits or super profits, so the overcompensation. It is normal. I'm not going to ask you why that didn't happen. That's for another place. It would be normal in contracts to build in a clawback clause in terms of super profits. Now, de facto, is the tiering approach the cleanest, smoothest way of doing a protection against super profits if you're doing this from day one, or are there other conceivable approaches around clawback on super profits that you could envisage, and were they considered in the business case?
Had the tier, and this is probably something that wasn't in the SEPA report, one of the key jobs of tiers is to regulate the rates of return
I would like them to
and significantly reduce the scope for variation in them.
Yeah.
Sorry, just hold on there. Sorry, Andrew has to go to this meeting at 16:30.
Yeah.
But Stephen and Shane will stay.
Well, can I park my question on the tiering? And I want to ask.
Well, we'll have Andrew back again on Monday morning.
It's a question ahead of Monday. It's actually more of a point rather than a question at this
please
stage.
quickly, Steve.
I'm very conscious that the Minister today has written to party leaders around a public inquiry, and I appreciate the issue and content of that is for another time, another place in the PAC process. But the fact that a public inquiry has potentially been set up, I think, is a scrutiny issue for this committee. And I'm conscious that there is a lot of concern and reassurance required around what our terms of reference in that regard. So just simply want to make the point and indeed request that, well, we're maybe not in a position to discuss it today, but I think on Monday, I think both if Andrew and the Minister are coming back, that we should be in a position. We're not going into what happened or why it happened. That's for another discussion, but in terms of what's going to happen in terms of any proposed inquiry should be brought to our attention on Monday.
I think that Sinead, you were next on the list anyhow.
I just quickly, Andrew, I wanted to get an idea of, we were thrown a bit of a lifeline here during the debate in terms of extra time. Yes. Has anything changed from that? Have we got any further DFP cover? Now, has the Minister been in touch with DFP?
There's been contact, and my understanding is that that process is progressing well, and certainly we've dealt with any questions that have come from the Department of Finance. So there's no reason to believe that that should not come through. And obviously, the much better position would be for that to be secured before the resumption of the debate, if that's Monday or Tuesday. So we're very, very hopeful of that. And we also have made progress with the Examiner of Statutory Rules. So she's considering it, and we've provided documentation and analysis to her to facilitate her process. So we're again confident of these processes.
Well, I appreciate that, and given the weight of consideration in this committee, I would think it important that we're given live updates on where that is, because we are trying to balance here leaving due process against the public interest, and we're not. I'm certainly not privy to the information that I need on that, and I think that's a critical piece of information I need to be fully aware of.
That's certainly.
If we can make a firm commitment that we are kept fully informed regularly and updated on a sort of a 24-hourly basis where we are, because I think that would be very appropriate to the members here. And
can I just ask, is that directly with the Minister or departmental officials that you're getting the reassurance?
Well, we can confirm as we're we'll keep you up to date with whatever we have from whatever source.
I maybe just say there that we had 3 or 4 days of quite intensive going back and forward to DOF, and that's as far as we're concerned, we've completed that process. We've supplied all the information that was required.
Okay.
Andrew, thank you. We look forward to seeing you on Monday morning, 9:30, bright and breezy. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. Here's my expert colleagues.
Would you like me to return to?
Yes. Maybe just reframe the question in 2 parts. It's essentially just to see, is tiering in effect the only or rather the most efficient means of essentially dealing with a super profit situation? And probably the second point to raise is one where I think there's maybe a slightly broader issue is around the justification for the 400,000 kilowatt hours cap, and the potential that there is an unfairness there, in that is maybe a more of a blunt instrument, in that the tiering itself is much more clearly linked towards use, irrespective of the level of investment, whereas the cap itself may be much more of a blunt instrument in that regard. And does that throw up potentially more anomalies or potentially more potential for grievance than the tiering process would?
Okay. Tiering Tiering is, as I've said before, one of its functions is good at regulating rate of return, and superimposed on the pre-November 2015 applications, it will do a good job going forward at regulating rates of return. It won't do a job of addressing overcompensation already received. Now, some of the other options that we've been looked at long term might be more helpful in that respect. There might be long term scope to look at tariff structures in a way that might help that, but that's a level of innovative thinking and so forth which we don't really have time for if we want to get a first step in the correction ready for 17-18.
And to just say, I mean, there are examples of that happening, you know, especially in big sort of capital-based projects where super profits are looked at. So there is the grounds to do that. But again, as Shane says, more time to look at those sort of things.
My understanding is the cap was brought in as a means to simply limit the almost a budgetary control where there was a limit as to what any one installation could receive. It's a feature of the November 15 tariff changes. And again, this goes back to, this is something off the shelf. This was something that was publicly stated to be in tune and in line with the original objectives of the scheme. And so then you're into questions about if you deviate from that, to what does that impact on the legal assurance, because it's no longer the same as something which you claimed in November 15 was in line with the original objectives of the scheme. I'm not legally competent to say whether it would damage your case, not at all, significantly, or somewhere in between. Just not.
But from an economic or financial point of view, is there a rationale for 400,000 that is particular to that?
My understanding, the rationale for the 400,000 was driven by what was typical in the poultry industry. From recollection, there was an assessment from CAFRE that the poultry industry per shed might be expected to use something like 388,000 kilowatt hours per annum, but that could be a little bit higher in a colder year. And so I think that was the basis where the 400,000 was chosen, but I'm going on the basis of my memory bank, having not been involved in it.
Okay, that's correct.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks, gentlemen.
Okay. Sinead, sorry.
Yes, just to say, I'm just a little bit concerned by that last answer, that it seemed to be built up around a particular industry, but I'll leave that aside for further. I run through, I have some questions and I'm conscious of time, and my colleagues will equally want to ask. And I won't repeat the question that Dr. Farry put so eloquently. My first concern was, why could it not happen sooner? Because we were firmly told that there were no grounds that we could deny anybody their right to a valid claim, but that thinking does seem to have changed, and for me to put any weight to that, I really do need to know where the business case is in terms of having approval from Department of Finance, and I did get an answer, but I'm no wiser, to be quite honest at this stage.
Well, for example, DFP economists round today, they would have been there on Monday, but obviously the regulations were initially moved on Monday, and we had a session on, well, it was the second session they had on the modelling on the rates of return inherent in the tariff band, and certainly there are no questions from DOF on the numbers and the financial side of things, which are sitting with me.
But there's no DOF approval as such. There's no minister. It's still within the gift of the minister, I understand, to have a look and say, give this an order, but there's no action there. I'm reading between the lines. So I'll move on to my question. Basically, I want to know the savings that we're looking at that could be achieved out of any remedial measures. Could they also extend to the Treasury? So if there were past misspendings, would they necessarily also extend to AMI in terms of what could be clawed back? And there was, it's a matter of record that the regulations expired in March 15, but spending continued. And I just want to know how was that period covered from April through to September, whenever there wouldn't be granted retrospective approval, did that come out of the DETI budget or economy budget, or was that Amy money to close that gap? My other question then goes back to, have you had any indication, we keep talking about going back to the objective here, and the objective and the original intent, and it was about renewable heat incentive. Have you had anything to suggest that the materials being used in some of these boilers are not renewable? And I know that is maybe looking over at the fraud as opposed to the overcompensation that we're trying to make the distinction about here. Because if that is the case, we're still then creating a piece of, whilst we're changing things, fraud could still be happening even within new limits. And I just want to know if there's been any suggestion or if inspections have picked up anything to suggest that the materials are not all renewable. And another point we're trying to make that distinction in terms of the application process. Did an applicant not have to give the nature or type of business, the reason they were installing, and the anticipated usage? Would that not be a good measure then to visit the anticipated usage that they would have at the outset subscribed to and their actual usage? And again, how is that measured? I know you did say it's meter readings, but if it's a meter reading and it's a non-renewable product being used, there still seems to be lots of questions here, and I know one question will probably, the answer to one will only reveal probably 10 more questions I want to put to you, but I'm trying to garner sufficient information to make a judgment here.
Dave.
I'll take the anticipated usage question. All the previous ones are operational. The anticipated, yes, applicants did indicate their level of anticipated usage. We have a database of that. There are a few cells that are probably blank in that, but by and large, if I have the information here, the applicants in the pre-November 15 era, where 99 kilowatt boilers were tending to indicate that they were going to run between 50 to 55% of the time. The data to date suggests that those probably expectations were a bit high, and the typical usage is more 40 to 45. So now for post-November applicants, they're indicating usage of, if I can remember correctly, I'm not sure if that's about 25% lower than that. Now, our sort of behavioural change modelling is, it's not as high as 25, I think it's 14, which is about 60% of that. So, yes, we have information to anticipated usage. What turns out seems to be a bit less than that, and there does seem to be a difference, albeit there's different boiler sizes as well, which could partly account for these. The band is going to extend to 199 boilers. That's twice the size. So whether you would expect load factors to be exactly the same, can't say. But there is certainly a difference between the anticipated running hours between those that applied before and after the changes. I'm not sure if that's exactly answered your question, but that's... it's one of the measures I want to know you are recording, and then that would indicate abuse if somebody goes in with an intent and they then maximise the boiler. And that going forward for inspections, I imagine there will be, they want to be prioritised. One way of prioritising that would be use your data to gauge where you'd want to focus your resources early. And things like data usage compared to expected, usage compared to comparators would be, you would imagine, one of the indicators as to those that you would prioritise inspecting and those that you might leave to later.
And just to add to that, you're absolutely right in terms of that, and in terms of 100% inspections, which we're writing the spec for at the minute, that will be a big part of it. Even looking at sort of within industries, what should the typical usage be, and comparing that against what the actual usage has been. So that will be built into that 100% inspection regime. In terms of the renewable heat question, that things being used that aren't renewable, I'm personally not aware of any of those cases. Say all the cases are referred to Ofgem for follow-up, but I could take a look to see if that has been the case, but I'm not aware of anything myself on that front to date. In terms of clawback and who gets the clawback funds, is it the Northern Ireland Bloc or is it Treasury? Like my understanding is that those do stay within the Northern Ireland Bloc, but there is a thing called a CFR, which is a non-budgetary estimated amount that does return back to Treasury. But I'll find out on that specific point for you. But I think, you know, just off the top of my head, I think those do stay within the Northern Ireland context. And does that maybe answer all your questions?
That period of time that there was pay, and it was outside budget cover, and it was outside any legal cover. Do you know if that came out of Amy or if it came out of the departments?
I'm not sure. I would need to.
Yeah, my understanding is the approval wouldn't impact on what budget line it comes from. This was the period where there was no DFP approval in place, and whether that impacts on its scoring against either Amy or Dale.
Yeah.
It's just I don't know where that money did come from because it didn't have cover. So
Yeah. I'll check up on that.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Gordon?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, gentlemen. In relation to the contracts that each applicant signed, is there any reference there to the department having an option to review the tariffs that you're aware of?
Not sure. Shane, if that's.
Again, not my understanding.
But sorry, that whole concept of review is very important in going forward.
Yeah.
We will be building that in. And that's comparing us to the GB scenario. That was one of the major failings. And GB review, I think, on a quarterly basis. You know, they look at what the tariff is compared to how the market is changing, and that's what we intend to do as well.
My understanding, I'm not an expert on the legal advice by any stretch. I mean, I think Andrew, unfortunately, knows more about it than certainly I do. That this is part of the consideration of the legal advice, and as to whether these are contracts or whether these are because the tariffs are set in regulation. That, as I understand it, there's a legal distinction been made between whether these were contracts or whether these were tariffs set in regulation by government, and that's a feature of the legal advice. But I'm not competent to go into the technicalities on it.
So just to sort of do that again, so we don't know if they're contracts or not.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not competent to. My understanding is part of the legal advice draws a distinction between what would be a contract and in this situation the tariffs were actually set in regulations, and that is a feature of the legal advice which is drawn particular comment in respect of our case. That's but I'm not competent enough legally to describe exactly why that distinction is important, but it was drawn out as important. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay. Just one other thing you mentioned earlier there. You talked about the 388 kilowatt hour annum is a figure produced by CAFRE per poultry unit.
From recollection.
Yeah, it's approximately or thereabouts.
Yeah, 388,000 per annum was some CAFRE analysis. Again, this is from recollection, not from the time, but from recent documents that we've looked at. And that's what I understand helped drive the choice of the 400,000 cap.
Is that a fair benchmark, do you think, then, for a lot of the units that are out working on farms and across Northern Ireland? Do you think that's a reasonable figure to be working on?
If I was sitting here next year with the benefit of the data, with the tier in place, with abusive behaviour better exposed by comparing this year's data, or no, the data next year compared to this year, I think it would be in a much better position to answer the question as to whether the cap is set at the right level, and that might be something that is reasonably looked at within the next year. But at the minute, I couldn't answer that question because there is evidence that there's abuse within the system. I don't know how extensive it is, and I don't know whether
that's right.
It is distorting the pitching of the cap.
Yeah. I think within the poultry industry accounts for like roughly 40% of the total amount of applicants.
Something of that order, I think.
Sorry, Chair, that's was an operational time of about 40 to 45%. Isn't that right? That's what your assessment was.
The load factor would be around about, I think it's mid-40s, at that sort of, I could do my calculation if you wanted, but...
You then mentioned that under the new tiering system, that reduced down to 25%. Isn't that right?
No, under the new tiering system, if you had a load of 400,000 kilowatt hours per annum, for the first roughly 130 odd thousand, you would get 6.5p, and then for the next, the balance of that, the 270-ish thousand, you would get 1.5p.
Yeah, and so the behaviour change you're saying was around 20% reduction with the new...
No, what I was saying earlier was...
With the new...
The new tariff was introduced November 2015.
Yeah.
We don't have that much data. There's a lot of those applications still pending in the system. Their accreditation is still pending.
Yeah.
As a result of no invoices, no data and usage. And so there's only limited data. And I don't think I have enough data at the minute to give you an indication that there will be of the extent of the behavioural change. We do have data as to what people said they were going to run, and there's a material difference as to what people said before, the 1,800 or so who applied before November 2015, compared to the 300 or so that applied after, and there's about a 25% reduction. That may not be an absolutely fair comparison because the applicants predominantly in the pre-November era were 99 boilers. Post-November 2015, there's a lot of 199 boilers, so they're twice the size, and so they mightn't be expected to run at the same load factor because it takes less hours to produce the same heat.
Yeah.
But until we have a year's data, I can't really give you a conclusive steer on that. I'm trying to give you the best indication I have from the data I have, which is not ideal without having a year's data for sufficient number of installations running in the new tariff in order to do that compare and contrast. I just don't have that yet.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you, Gordon. Alan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know whether you would be empowered to answer these questions, but maybe Andrew would have been better placed, but I'll ask them anyway. In terms of John Robinson, who is the Minister Hamilton's Special Advisor, who we understand has stood aside from any further involvement in Renewable Heat Incentive Scheme, can I ask, has Mr Robinson had any involvement in crafting this scheme to date?
That's a valid question. Business plan.
And I'm not aware of any.
Right.
Feelings.
So I know in terms of the botched scheme, there's very few no politicians coming forward to call it their plan. But this mitigation plan, I have heard the Minister refer to it as his plan. I'm just wondering, is it his plan? Did he sort of knock on somebody's door on a Monday morning and say, look, I've been thinking about this over the weekend, I've come up with a great idea here to mitigate this? Or is this plan, has it been developed and crafted by the civil servants within the department, as opposed to being a political plan?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say it's an element of both. We have had a number of roundtable discussions internally about what options that we have, and those have involved the Minister.
So it would be fair to say then, in terms of going back to the botched RHI scheme, then it would be fair to say that there was ministerial roundtable talks about formulating it and putting it together. I mean, it would be a constant if that's the way you do it. Presumably that's the same way the original scheme would have been put together, with ministerial output and ministerial roundtable discussions. And
May I just interject at that point? Thank you, Mr. Chambers, for your point. I think we're probably straying, I've just been advised, we're straying into PAC territory here. And I think in that case, I think we've noted for the record, and it's recorded on the record of the question that's been asked, but I would fully understand that sort of Stephen and Shane are probably not in a position to sort of answer.
I didn't want to put you in an impossible position with it, but thank you.
Thank you for that. Sinead, just
Yeah, I just want
Very-
to, very quick. I noticed that the date, the 31st of March, has been used here as the close date. And that, just for the public record, who do you anticipate's job it would be to note that date and revisit and make sure that action was taken before that date? Because we know there's been slippage in the past. And would that date be in any future committee's diary as well as ministerial or department diaries?
Yeah, well, we have ourselves developed a timeline of what we need to do in the next 12 months. And we need to do things far sooner than March. You know, it's about November time, I think it will have, where decisions have to be taken in terms of what the new second stage permanent solution will be, even to allow us time to bring regulations to bring extend the current system. So we have a timeline, and we'll be working very much to those timelines with key milestones that we have to achieve. But certainly within that, November is a key date. That you know, we have to have things in place.
But who is that? You say, is that the minister?
That's at official level,
you
know,
and with the committee, you know, a committee.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's in diaries.
Absolutely, yeah.
So thank you.
If it's useful for me to clarify that these are a one-year set of regulations. Once a set of regulations expires, something else has to come to a base.
Yes.
And if there is a committee to scrutinise it, the committee would be looking to scrutinise any subsequent.
It's just we've already had the gap in legislation, and I just don't think a repeat of that would be helpful. And I do think any longer-term vision that may be in the discussions in the department might actually be helpful to put in the public domain to those potential people or applicants that may look at the scheme now and be minded to take legal action or a JR. May see something in the longer term that they see a satisfactory balance there. So I think, you know, there's a bit of an onus on the department to be more open than they have been to date on this.
Okay, thank you, Sinead. Just one final thing before you go, Shane and Stephen, and you'll probably be very thankful to get out of here. Stephen, when were you appointed in this role?
On the 19th of December.
19th December. Shane, when were you appointed?
I'm not part of the RHI task force or team. I'm part of analytical services within DFE, and I've been there I've been there in DFE since it was set up, and before that it was in DETI, Analytical Services Unit. So I'm not part of Stephen's team, but I was drafted in to help with the number crunching, so to speak, around and the modelling of the tariffs.
I don't envy either of you your tasks, but thank you very much indeed, and please pass our thanks on to the Permanent Secretary as well, and say to him, we look forward to seeing him on Monday morning. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll do that. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, it will come as no surprise to you who have all been watching your Twitter feeds and watching your online things that the Finance Minister has called for a public inquiry, and he will make an announcement on that on
next week.
Next week on the Assembly.
It's under the 2005
Inquiries Act.
Well, they were against that.
Yes.
Well, they were against it.
Another U-turn.
Been knocked a few doors in the meantime.
They're getting dizzy.
SDLP put too much pressure on them.
That's it.
Michael, please come. Please bring your team. Ladies and gentlemen, we're very sorry for the length of time that you've probably heard the deliberations with the department, but as you can imagine, the information flow we've had has been fairly sparse. And I'm particularly glad that you're able to come here because we need to hear the other side, which we haven't seen at all. And Michael, please feel free, give us your opening statement, giving your views and perspectives. But if you just introduce your team with you as well, just so that we get a sense of who we're talking to, so that gives a bit more sort of feel and information to it. But once more, welcome and thank you very much indeed for coming here.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll introduce the team as I go through it. Our presentation won't last more than about 14 or 15 minutes. I'm Michael Doran, I'm the Chair of the Renewable Heat Association, and I'm also Managing Director of Action Renewables. The Renewable Heat Association was set up 2 weeks ago to cope with the issues that we've got at the moment. It represents owners, trade bodies, suppliers and installers throughout the industry. We've currently got about 350 members, so within the space of 2 weeks, because we only formally launched on the 9th of January, we've already got about 350 members. And we are representing responsible operators who do not seek to abuse the scheme but who are using it for legitimate use. And I want to make that very, very clear. We're not here to support any form of abuse. The group at the moment of the 350 is primarily in the agricultural sector. That is not deliberate. It's because the nature of the organisations who originally indicated that they wanted to form an association. And that was the Ulster Farmers Union, Biomass Energy Northern Ireland, the Poultry Producers Association and the Mushroom Growers Association. Those were the people who came to us and asked us to put it together. We have concerns about the speed with which the proposed legislative change is being brought in and that there's been no consultation before this change. That is our main concern at the moment. And it's very unclear about what the figures are. As we go through this presentation, we're deliberately trying to stay away from complicated data and piles of figures. We're trying to give you an understanding today of what's happening in the industry and keeping the numbers out of it. If you subsequently want more analysis with data, we can do that. But at the moment, we're trying to keep this as simple as we possibly can. First of all, there are factual errors in the auditor's report from last July. So already we've got an issue. I'll give you one example. It says in there that recently it's been indicated that there's an overspend of 12 million. But it said in the auditor's report in July that the previous year there was an underspend of 15 million. Could somebody tell me, has that underspend of 15 been set against the overspend this year? I don't challenge that there may have been an overspend this year, but actually, as of today, are we actually sitting at a -3 spend? That's not clear. We've taken legal advice on where this might go if this is implemented, and we believe that the actions to modify the scheme are illegal, and it's our intention to challenge that decision in court. Just before I hand over to some of my colleagues, we have a proposal about how to solve this. We launched that proposal on the 9th of January, and it's interesting that the department seemed to have adopted most of it, except for the bit that they're now cutting the scheme. So what we were proposing on the 9th of January was that there would be audits of all of the schemes, both technical and business case, that we would set up a voluntary code. The department have not yet got that far. That all of the existing contracts should be audited, and where anybody's found to be acting fraudulent.
Just for a piece of it. So, is there any code existing at the moment?
Sorry?
Is there any code existing at the moment?
No, there isn't. And we think there should be. And we're in the process of developing a voluntary code for our members. And we also recommend we are going to commission our own economic assessment to look at the cost of the scheme to date, the actual cost to the Exchequer, the extent of the anticipated overspend, and the environmental value, which is something you're going to hear about later on today. I want to take you back just one step. What was the objective of this at the very beginning? It was to increase the use of renewable heat in Northern Ireland. And that seems to have been lost in all of this figures and facts and overspend. There'll be 3 presentations today. There'll be John Martin, who's acting on behalf of Bioenergy Northern Ireland. He'll also be doing the summary. There's Tom Forgrave, who's acting on behalf of the poultry industry. And there's Elaine, who's acting on behalf of the mushroom industry. Thank you very much.
Cheers, thanks very much. John, who's leading up?
Yeah.
No, sorry.
I'll take you through the mushroom sector. Thank you very much for giving us the chance to speak to you today, because I think it is very important that as a sector we get our concerns across. The mushroom sector is a relatively small sector. We have 27 growers with an approximate turnover of 27 million. We employ 1,200 staff directly and a further 720 indirectly in packaging, compost and casing. The mushroom industry, along with a lot of agri-food sectors, are under a lot of substantial cost pressures over the last months due to the exchange rate fluctuations. And Northern Ireland mushrooms are becoming less competitive in the marketplace. And this is further compounded by the constant pressure from customers looking cheaper food. Many of the savings and efficiencies made on our farms do not stay with the primary producer, but are passed down the supply chain. As a result of the living wage increases over this last 18 months, and the exchange rate fluctuation costs have risen about 17% in real terms for growers. The current climate in mushroom production is not about...
Sorry, just to say that the costs have risen by 17%?
Yes, because of there's been 2 wage increases, which accounts for 14%, and then there's been exchange rate fluctations. We buy our compost
Which is the
in the
compost
south
from
of
the south
Ireland.
coming up.
Yeah, so it's increased dramatically.
Yeah.
So that is a 17% across the board. So in the current climate, mushroom production, it's not about growth, it's about staying in business. So the potential when the contract that was created is broken with our growers and the proposed tariff implemented, it puts the growers under severe financial pressure, and very quickly. So just to fill you in where the mushroom industry has been on energy strategy and how the RHI fitted into that. Over the last 10 years, our industry has implemented an energy efficiency strategy, working both with CAFRE and the Farm Energy Centre in Stoneleigh to carry out energy audits on farm. We went to great lengths to ensure our farms are energy efficient and reduce the energy they require by upgrading pipework, improving insulation, sealing doors, all that. So over a 5-year period, our mushroom growers have reduced their energy usage by 25%. An integral part of this strategy since 2013 was the conversion from oil to biomass. So it didn't matter if we were burning oil or burning biomass, we wanted to be energy efficient first, and then the next stage was the renewable energy. So the capital investment was the barrier. It was a significant cost to move to renewables, plus a significant hassle factor in that when you have an oil boiler, you hit a button and it works all the time. There's a lot more managing in renewable energy. So with the RHI...
Just for the sake of the record, what's the cost of a standard biomass boiler, let's say a 99 kilowatt one, or one that you would be using?
The standard cost we would have is about 55,000. That includes the boiler, the pellet store, the pipe work. So the whole installation cost was on average about 55,000. Yeah. So the RHI scheme was timely. It incentivised the growers, provided them with the route to be able to invest in those in the boilers. 2013 was the first installation of a 99 kilowatt boiler, and over the next 3 years, 90% of the growers invested over £2 million collectively installing the boilers. Now, this investment reduced our growing costs by 4%, which was a substantial margin, and it has been critical to allow our growers to remain competitive and compete with Polish mushrooms that are being imported. So the impact in the sector, if the contract is broken, by breaking the contract and in the manner and the speed, it leaves our mushrooms less competitive, resulting in a potential reduction of our margin by 4%. Growers have met the requirement of the scheme, and included in the scheme, the pricing. When we were pricing mushrooms, we priced in the cost reduction. So when we were pricing contracts with customers, we set prices based on the RHI scheme. So we can't go back to customers next week and say, from the 1st of April, your mushroom price has increased by this because. So the potential there with contracts to be lost with certain customers if they won't give us a price rise. I addressed the Yard Committee last year because of the concerns of the horticultural industry with the prices, and prices haven't increased over that time.
Elaine, you say that if we went, have you had any look at the costs that if this scheme was, as the department are proposing, what the impact that would be on your cost base?
It would be probably about 2%.
That's a lot in tight margins.
Yeah, 2%. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And again, under that, and we'll get into it later, because the GB scheme is different, we would have been actually allowed to do the 199 installation, and that installation would potentially have cost 80,000, whereas we had to do 2 99s and they cost 110,000. So we're at a cost disadvantage because of the capital that we had to, because of the 99 cap, and that was imposed on the scheme. We didn't ask for a 99 kilowatt cap. We had to follow that. So it's put at a great disadvantage now, because ultimately if somebody in the November scheme, they could have put in a 199 kilowatt boiler. So it's a massive...
you're being, in essence, what you're saying is you're being penalised for going early?
Yes, yeah. Okay. So again, it impacts on the growers' ability to pay commitments to bank, its impact on further investment, and again, Shane would have actually been out in one of our mushroom units 2 years ago, and as he was talking, growers were making a decision on the return on capital. Do they invest in biomass or do they invest in Dutch shelving? Dutch shelving would put more mushrooms, increase economies of scale. They made the decision to go to renewable energy. So that decision was made on the basis of the contract that we have. Different decision may be made if this potential was coming down the line. So
Sorry, were you referring to Shane? You were referring to Shane, the economist?
Yes, yeah.
So he came out and sort of
So
told...
just on a totally separate,
All right.
element, he knows the sector totally different, but when he was talking about people making decisions on what they were going to spend, the decision was made because of the contract and the tariff that the renewable energy reduced our costs and made us more competitive. If we knew what was going to happen now, a grower might have said, actually, I'll invest in Dutch shelving. That'll be a better route to reduce costs. So we're just saying it's wholly unfair to break the contracts with mushroom growers that have adhered to the conditions of the scheme in full. Growers will be penalised due to the poor implementation of the scheme by the Department of the Economy. As an industry, we have went to great lengths to reduce our energy requirements and will continue to monitor and assess our ongoing energy usage to ensure maximum efficiencies. Mushroom growers entered the scheme for the correct reasons and have at all times adhered to the criteria of the scheme. We believe the current proposal is in no way a solution to any of the problems that have been raised and merely acts as a diversion from the real issue of the governance and lack of due diligence of the scheme.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. Tom?
Thank you. I'm Bahan here on behalf of the poultry sector. Can I just take you back to pre-RHI? The poultry sector would have been one of the largest users of liquid propane gas in Northern Ireland. And looking back from what we know now, we know that we did have issues with poultry production using LPG and burning it within the sheds. The RHI scheme came along and it made a huge difference to poultry production in Northern Ireland. We've hugely reduced our reliance on imported LPG. We've removed burning a naked gas flame within our sheds. We now have hot water heating. And this has provided numerous benefits to the welfare of our chickens because the environment is now drier and healthier. We've reduced the use of antibiotics to almost zero.
Sorry, just for the record, you say you've managed to reduce the use of antibiotics in poultry to almost zero?
Almost zero.
And that, you say, is attributable to the fact that we've gone from the damp heating effect that would have been from LPG to the dry, sort of the more efficient heating from the boiler system?
Most of it, not all of it, but most of it is coming from that improved environment.
Okay.
Ammonia used to be a problem within the sheds. It's a recognised greenhouse gas, and the hot water heating has reduced it by a factor of up to 10. Carbon monoxide is no longer present within the shed because we're no longer burning a naked flame. And we also have much less CO2 within the environment as well. Because of these things, we've found bird performance has improved, and we're now importing fewer tonnes of soya from South America. We've been able to reduce the amount of bedding we require in the poultry shed because it's drier, and subsequently we've dramatically reduced the amount of waste bedding coming out of the poultry shed at the other end. This helps us to reach targets set by NIEA and reducing litter being spread to land. We used to have two significant welfare issues within the poultry industry. We had pododermatitis, which is a burn on the footpad of the bird, and we had hawk marking. And moving to biomass hot water heating, we've reduced both these welfare issues dramatically. We now have a higher percentage of saleable chicken with less waste. And the RHI scheme has enabled us to remain competitive with production in GB, where biomass heating is an ongoing success story, and the RHI scheme remains open.
Could you, just as for the evidence base, could you, if you've got the data for GB, could you say what proportion of sort of the poultry industry in GB, particularly in England, Wales, I know Scotland might be slightly different, is now being supported by biomass?
I don't know the numbers, but it is significant.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Leading on from all of that, I'd like to highlight then the effects that these proposed amendments that are on the table will make to our industry. We do have a high heat requirement within the sheds. Nobody's disputing that. But with the new tariff ceiling that's been proposed, we're going to have to revert back to burning LPG once we hit that cap. If the additional LPG required is cost prohibitive, which it most certainly will be, many of the benefits that I've just outlined will be lost. We will once again be at the whim of international energy markets. We may very well become uncompetitive with poultry production in GB, and therefore we fear that any future expansion in the poultry industry will happen in GB rather than Northern Ireland. One of the main fears that farmers have is that they have invested significant sums of money, not only in the boilers, but also the equipment that we need to put inside the chicken sheds to transfer that heat. There have been significant investments, and there's a real fear that the growers will be unable to meet their financial requirements should this change be implemented. The reality is that there have been cost savings over the last 2 years, and these have already made their way down the supply chain, and we fear that they cannot be recovered if there is a change made. Can I reiterate what the mushroom company have said, or the mushroom industry have said? If this change is implemented, the early adopters are going to be unfairly disadvantaged. The early adopters have a 99 kilowatt boiler. That's what the scheme limit was. And the proposal is to limit that to 1,314 hours. The late adopters had a 199 kilowatt boiler. 1,314 hours is double the kilowatts per year on the 6.5p. So by the law of unintended consequences, you're actually introducing a two-tier system, which is unfair to the early adopters. Through the course of the last couple of weeks, there's been a couple of questions have come to the fore from the poultry industry. The first one is, was the poultry industry even taken into consideration during the original consultation process? If it wasn't, then that was quite a large oversight by the consultants. But however, if it was taken into consideration, then the Barnett formula was never going to work with RHI. Northern Ireland has only 3% of the population, but we produce between 10 and 20% of the UK chicken production. The other question being asked is, was 3% of the total UK RHI budget set by Westminster ever going to get us to the 10% renewable heat target for Northern Ireland by 2020? We are currently at 6.8% renewable heat, with a projected overspend of between 20 and 30 million pounds. Surely the budget was flawed from the very beginning, and was the overspend not inevitable? Thank you.
Just for the record, what's the size of the Northern Ireland poultry industry in financial terms and employment?
The Northern Ireland broiler meat industry, we are producing 2.2 to 2.5 million chickens per week. We're the Northern Ireland's single largest employer. I believe Moy Park employ 12,000 people. Financial turnover in Moy Park are turning over 1.2 to 1.4 billion, I believe. Again, I don't have those figures in front of me. And there are other poultry industries out there beyond Moy Park.
So we're a multi-billion pound industry.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. John?
Thank you, Chairman. Committee members, my name is John Martin. I've been Chairman of Biomass Energy Northern Ireland for a number of years, so we've been active to try and promote local supply chains for Northern Ireland grown and produced biomass. So there has been a biomass sector in Northern Ireland for quite a number of years, predating RHI. There were in excess of 25 drying facilities. They were producing renewable fuel, mainly for local consumption. And the introduction of RHI has replaced fossil-based heat sources for the drying of wood chip in those facilities in order to meet customer specifications, and that's very much in line with internationally recognised quality standards. It is now viable to chip and dry biomass material, which was previously considered waste and had no value, the likes of forestry brash, for example. So that's generating additional income for the economy. So I want to set that to the side and maybe move to summarise what my colleagues and I have raised this afternoon in our presentation. Firstly, to emphasise, we do not condone any fraudulent behaviour in any way, shape or form. The proposed RHI amendment will have very significant consequences for many small businesses
which most of the participants are. The participants applied legitimately to make the switch to renewable heat. They were not responsible for managing applications or administering the budget, but are being forced to carry the cost of failures in administering the programme. Renewable heat is a proven technology which has operated very successfully in other jurisdictions and continues to do so. The current proposal, we believe, to amend the scheme is poorly thought out and a knee-jerk reaction caused by the solely negative portrayal of RHI by some sections of the media. The proposal to vary the contract has much wider implications, we believe, for future government contracts. And I suppose, foreign direct investors, for example, may ask the question, will any contract I sign with the Northern Ireland Executive be worth the paper it's written on? So we believe there's a much wider issue than just simply around RHI. Businesses participating in the scheme are involved across a range of sectors: manufacturing, public sector, leisure, hospitality, elder care and agricultural production, among others. They generate significant income and create employment for the Northern Ireland economy. These businesses install renewable heat to improve their efficiency. We recognise the concern relating to the overspend in relation to the non-domestic scheme. However, the figures used in the calculations by the Department are not clear, and to date we've been unable to clarify the assumptions that have been made, and some of those have been raised already. A public inquiry will not address the financial implication of amending the payments rate. It will simply look at the administration and development of the scheme. So we would submit the following recommendations to help achieve a workable solution. Firstly, there has been no consultation around the proposed amendment. There should be a delay of 3 months to allow a statutory period of consultation to be completed, with no changes in contracts imposed in the meantime. Secondly, the Department used this 3-month period to complete the audits of all RHI accreditations, or installations rather, and I'm pleased to hear Department officials say that they're going to go down that line, but we would urge them to, that has to be speeded up. The inspections are completed with more haste. These should look at the technical design and operation of the equipment, as well as the business need for the heat that is produced. Next, there's a compelling need to complete an independent economic assessment, which will quantify the benefits to RHI to the Northern Ireland economy, as well as the costs of operating the scheme. So all of the focus has been on the negative, none on the positive. And as an association, we're prepared to complete that within an 8-week period. And of course, we can discuss terms with the committee around the terms of reference for this. Finally, we will produce a voluntary code for members to ensure compliance with the terms and spirit of the RHI scheme. And in conclusion, we believe that the rush to draft this amendment has bypassed the scrutiny mechanisms which should be the cornerstone of good government. Legislation produced in a hasty manner is likely to be flawed and may reflect poorly on those who adopt it. Thank you very much. Sorry, we're just talking amongst ourselves. Okay. But the question about an economic assessment, and I think that's one of the things that's missing throughout this is that there's not a lot of. We haven't seen a lot of data. We've heard a lot of. Yep. There seems to be a lot of haste going towards particular things, and we haven't actually seen, on any side, any sort of detailed economic assessment of what's happened. Yeah, and that's just the reason I was just talking with the clerk was just to get some views about that. So please don't take that as any slight, but the idea of I'll talk to the rest of the committee on the actions afterwards. But one of the things I will be proposing is that we write to the department to be in the process of commissioning and working towards an independent economic assessment of what the impact of this is likely to be. Because I'll ask other people to ask a few questions in a second, but I'm very concerned about the impact of the mushroom business. I'm very aware of some of the issues that they've had with sort of disease across the border. And I don't want to see anything that's going to severely impact the mushroom industry. And we need to be able to quantify that issue. And as far as sort of the poultry industry, I mean, it is one of Northern Ireland's success stories, and it's an area of growth as well. So we need to really understand what the impact and the likely impact is going forward. I'm not prejudging anything. We don't have sufficient data and we don't have that particular things. Sinead, I'd like to...
Yes, thank you, and thank you for your presentation. Firstly, I'd like to ask John. John, have you noticed any increase in new businesses starting up in terms of drying out that could have been born purely to serve this RHI scheme?
Well, as indicated, there have been quite a considerable number of installations involved in producing biomass, particularly wood chip arising from locally grown energy crops. Some of the material also came from, was derived from forestry that was chipped. As I indicated, there have been other materials that have been previously, pushed into a pile and simply, a match put to them, and obviously releasing carbon in the process, but have been considered as a waste. With RHI in place, there's now the opportunity to utilise some of that material. So forestry brash, for example, which is the material that's left after all the saleable product has been removed, is now being baled up and can be chipped, and requires a degree of drying to make it saleable and usable for end users. Part of the reason around the whole drying issue is to do with stability in storage. And because of our temperate climate, material doesn't dry out naturally to this required moisture content to allow it to be stored safely. In wet in store, there is the risk that it could heat naturally and spontaneously combust. And additionally, you could have mould such as aspergillus, which causes farmers' lung, associated with poorly cured hay in the past. So that creates a significant health risk to everybody involved in the handling, the transport, and even the use or in the place of use of the material. So to answer your question, there has been some development within the sector, partially to provide material for additional boilers, although the majority of additional boilers have been of a pellet, or using wood pellets
but
rather
not new
than wood chip.
businesses, not new businesses set up specifically for that.
Well, in the normal course of business cycle, people will set up a new painter's business or a new plumber's, so there are additional people who have...
Okay, would there been, was it a notable number? It's just, I'm saying, or would it be in the natural order? Or have you noticed a spike? I'm just thinking, because the RHI obviously was so attractive to so many, were there new businesses that have been created to serve that?
There would be some new businesses,
Right.
yes, but there's also been, I'd say, a number of long-standing businesses involved in the sector.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And and I really do take your point. I'm looking here at the conclusions and basically saying that anybody that supports any efforts to make an attempt to claw back, that it reflect purely on them. But I think even as individuals, you have to appreciate there is a balance here. There's a balance against the public purse, and nobody is intent on going out to cost anybody jobs or anything that doesn't have growth in our economy. And I suppose, Tom, the words you were using, antibiotics, bedding, welfare, heating, at the back of my mind, there are people who can't get antibiotics because they don't have access to GPs because of our public purse. Bedding, we all know the trolleys in hospitals, people can't get a bed. Welfare, do I need to say welfare reform? And as for heating, there are people with heat and eat. So, to say it reflects poorly, I think we have to all take a measured yardstick to this. It's nice to know our chickens are doing well, and I don't say that flippantly because I realise the potential in terms of job offer and the growth through our economy, which we're acutely aware of, and the importance of that. But it is about finding that balance. And I think it's duty bound on all of us to take that more measured approach rather than saying it's just a poor reflection on somebody if they want to take action to somehow alleviate the strain on the public purse, because we're not talking about those businesses that are legitimately in there. We are having to look at cases that we're told that there is potential fraud and abuse, and it's incumbent on everybody to do everything we can to make sure that that stops with immediate and hurried effect. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, Michael, yes, sir. Please.
I agree with 98% of what you've said. The issue is that what is proposed is not actually going to stop the fraud. What they're doing is just cutting it across. And this is an example I gave on the radio the other day. We all know that there is benefit fraud in Northern Ireland. I don't see anybody suggesting that we cut the benefits of all of the people who are receiving it legitimately to make up for the people who are doing it illegitimately. I'll give you one other little example. If this is the fact that we've got with people who have developed businesses on the back of the RHI, it's like you signing up to a mortgage for 20 years. And 2 years into it, the mortgage company comes back and says, we're going to increase your payments by a factor of 3, because this is what this is looking at. This is actually cutting the payments within RHI by a factor of 3. So if I came back to you and said, right, sorry about this, made a bit of a mistake, we're going to charge you 3 times as much in your mortgage, it's going to cause financial hardship. And I agree completely with you, we need a solution, but what we're saying, this quick fix plaster is not the solution.
I take your point, yeah.
Yeah. Gordon?
Thank you.
Oh, Gordon Lance, sorry.
Yeah, particularly down.
And Gordon Dunn, please.
Thanks very much. First of all, I think we do just need to recognise, and I think that people haven't recognised this yet, that there are people out there that have these boilers and they're operating them in a completely legitimate way. Because there's innuendo and the insinuation that if you have one of these, you're doing something wrong.
Correct.
And I think that is important. I think you've added to that today, and I think it's important that is placed on the record. We're obviously wanting to hear your point of view and wanting to hear your evidence, but at the same time we've had some others in the chairs just before you who have responsibilities and have a job to do. And Andrew McCormick had said that it was the department's intention that the rate of return would be, for people who invest in this way, would be in and around 12% or thereabouts. It's turned out that in some cases the rate of return has been 40 or 50 or even in some cases over 60%. I suppose just the first question I want to ask you is, do you believe that's an excessive rate of return?
Can I just say we are moving as fast as we can. Yesterday we sent out a notification to all of our members to try and get data. To date, we've got 102 responses back to try and assess what the rates of return are. At the moment, I honestly don't know, because that's going to take us 3 or 4 days to plod through that. So this is something I think
Do we have that, Michael? When you've got that data, could we forward that to the committee, please? Thank you.
But no, I don't know how you define what an acceptable rate of return is. And if that wasn't the intention of the scheme, that may be an unintended consequence. You're quite right. It is possible that some schemes are giving that rate of return. But I'm bringing you back to, we didn't create the scheme. And it's supposed to be a 20-year scheme, but now it's been cut after 2 years. And it's going to leave a very tarnished image for Northern Ireland on the world stage if the government is seen to back out of a 20-year commitment.
Okay, I understand it's not perhaps your job to define or comment on what, or define what is an reasonable rate of return. But could I ask, again, do you think a 50 or 60% return is excessive?
If I can take that question, please. I think going back again to when the scheme was first set up, we have to think back to the economic situation then. Oil was $110 a barrel and wood pellets were £200 a tonne. That's the time the RHI tariff was set. There's been a big change. Today, the oil price is $50 a barrel and pellets are £150 a tonne. What I think, with hindsight, there probably should have been a fuel ratchet price mechanism built into the scheme, and it wasn't. And I think that's quite a big oversight by the scheme, that if fuel prices had come down, the tariff could have come down as in line. On that knowledge, the tariff being set at 5.9p was the correct tariff. That left the correct return on investment for the conditions back then. We also have to remember we did have a limit on a 99 kilowatt boiler. The GB scheme had a 199 kilowatt boiler. So for a guy in GB who had a poultry shed, he had the facility of a 199 kilowatt boiler to heat that shed. We were trying to heat the same shed with a boiler half that size. That boiler is going to work for longer hours. It's simple physics. I think, too, another thing we need to remember, whenever the scheme was first launched in the GB, they were getting 9p a kilowatt. They also had access to cheaper fuel than we had. So to say that we were over-incentivised would be a fallacy. Okay? I think if we go back again to 2012, the proposal that's on the table now, this tiered scheme on a 99 kilowatt boiler, 1,314 hours at 6.5p, reducing to 1.5p to a cap of 400,000. If that offer was put on the table today as the definitive RHI scheme, would anybody sign up to the scheme and put a boiler in? I can categorically say no, the numbers do not add up, and there wouldn't be one boiler put in under that tariff.
I think that's what I'm trying to get at then, is that you're saying you don't believe that these rates of return are excessive.
I want to bring something to your attention. There is the report, the NIAO report 2015-16. I'm sure you're all aware of it. There's a page refers to poultry directly, page 110, paragraph 42, and this refers to poultry production. And it makes an assumption that poultry producers are running their boilers 365 days a year, only turning them off to service them. That, we cannot do that. We have a period every 7 weeks where the birds go out. The boiler is turned off for anywhere from 7 to 14 days, depending on turnaround. Further to that page, if you check page 117 of the same report, it has a work-through page on running a boiler 365 days a year. That page is flawed. Within that page, there's the assumption because you run your boiler 365 days a year, after 5 years, it's completely done and will be replaced. So number one, why would we run our boilers every day knowing it's going to break down in 5 years? The more important point is, under the RHI scheme, you only get the payment on the boiler you install on day one. Right? If that boiler is destroyed for any reason,
You don't get the money.
it cannot be replaced. It does not attract RHI. So to put that assumption in your report and say that boiler will be replaced every 5 years is completely false. And I think there's a glaring misunderstanding or not understanding the technicalities of the scheme. And that worries us around this table. That it is not understood fully. Another part of that factor, why I highlight this is in the press. The press have got this, and they are showing poultry producers making 82% return. Is it any wonder we're being demonised? There is nobody making that return, but this is in the paper. They've also assumed that prior to RHI...
Sorry, if I could just interject there, I suppose we're going on to a different topic now then. Is the argument you're trying to make is that nobody's getting this 60, 70, 80% return?
No, but you factor in all the costs. And again, this page here doesn't factor in, it doesn't factor in insurance, it doesn't factor in interest on bank loans. There's a lot of information missing. We don't believe anybody is making those rates of return. Are they making more than 12%? Some are, some aren't. Within our own industry, we have a multitude of ranges of sheds. We have sheds that hold 10,000 chickens, and we have sheds that hold 40,000 chickens. We have sheds on the top of a hill, we have sheds in the valley. We have sheds that are 40 years old, and we have sheds that are 2 years old. Huge range. And for anybody to suggest that 400,000 is the number that a man needs to produce chicken, doesn't stand up. Some guys will use less, some guys will use more. Should we be criminalised for using more? I don't believe we should.
Okay.
If we're using more than 400,000 kilowatts under this new tariff, the birds still need heat. We can't turn the heat off and let those birds go cold, but we're going to have to fund pellets out of our own pocket. So this proposal on the table has really, really serious consequences for our industry.
And I think it is useful as well, just to, as Andrew was saying earlier on, we need to differentiate between fraud and overcompensation. But overcompensation, I think, is still an issue that needs to be addressed, because obviously, again, from the department's point of view, they have a budget envelope in which they have to operate. And I think no one is saying that this is an ideal situation at all, and it is a short-term one because the regulations will cease on the 31st of March
2018
next year.
It's passed.
You have included in your own plan, is that right? What you would, at the rates you want to see?
No, we haven't put anything in about rates. What
Okay.
we're saying is we need to take a considered opinion. And can I just, I don't want to contradict anything that anybody said, but I just want to take you back to one thing, which is you said that it's a one-year scheme. My understanding, and I may have misheard it, I thought the Permanent Secretary said earlier on that it may well be that that scheme will then continue. So I don't think that this is an intention for this to be a permanent, for it to be a temporary fix.
Well, as a committee, that's all we're doing today.
Yeah.
In terms of, we're not looking at what comes after that. Understandably, that this obviously could form the basis of what comes next. So that's obviously important for us to consider.
Can I give you one other example? This is only one example, and this is an exaggerated example, and I fully accept that. One of our members has invested £1 million in a back-end process which is driven by his boiler. So he's making a profit out of running the boiler, which allows him to drive a very specific kind of product that he's selling outside Northern Ireland. If this rate is cut, he's already signed up to a 5-year contract. He cannot continue to run that business. So his investment is not just in a £50,000 boiler, it's in a £1 million bolt-on which can't function cost effectively without this RHI. So there are consequences. And I have to go back again to something that was said earlier on. And it was, I'm not sure, I think it was it Shane was talking about, one of you asked the question about what are the risks. And he said risks about doing nothing, operational risks and legal risks. They don't seem to be considering what about the financial hardship risks to a lot of businesses who are going to be affected. I fully agree with your point earlier on. We've got to do something to cut this back because there's an overspend.
Michael, that's fully understood and through the Chair. And more than anything, this committee has realised that there's significant issues to do with how risk is looked at as well. Gordon, you just want to...
I really appreciate your indulgence. Just one more question, if that's okay. You've said in your submission that the current proposal to amend the scheme is poorly thought out and a knee-jerk reaction. The evidence session that we had just before with the Permanent Secretary, he said that there is no quicker or better option, and he says it's a very defensible, very viable proposal. We're having to make a decision on this.
Yes.
And we have to make sure it is the best option on the table. We need to make sure that it is viable and it is defensible. As decision makers, we need to have all the information we have. So if this is a proposal that you believe isn't viable, defensible, a good option or anything else, what would you suggest instead then that we can do, which has the same outcome as this, which is reduce the overspend to
take 3 months,
0.
do the economic assessment, and then make a considered opinion about what you're doing. I'm reluctant.
That takes us into the next financial year.
Yes, it does.
So
I'm reluctant to give you an instant solution for several reasons. A, I don't know what the outworkings could be. I'll throw you out a figure of 4p per kilowatt hour. I have no idea what the financial implications are to people, to the budget for that. I'll be making figures up. Secondly, we have not consulted with our 350 members, so if I put a figure out here today, that hasn't been agreed. Secondly, we don't represent the entire industry, so if I throw a figure out now, there's another 1,600 people who are not in our association. I'll be going, who are you talking on behalf of? So we're saying this is premature.
And I think that highlights the difficulty that we are in, because we believe there needs to be, and I think everybody's united, we want to see a solution to this as soon as possible, and we want this in place for the next financial year. And I don't think there is anything else on the table. I don't think there are any other ideas for us, and it's hard to disagree with the analysis that was given, that this is the best option that is there and that it's defensible and that it's viable. But there's certainly a lot of information here for us to consider, and I think this is important as we go forward. If an assembly exists.
Thank you.
Or an executive comes away, and if we're still returned, if we're still in the economy committee, there's a lot of ifs here, isn't there? But it forms the basis of what we should be looking for, about again in the next scheme. But I think it's clear what you're saying, that there is no better option for our time and financial requirements. Thanks very much, Chair.
Good, thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Chair. And welcome to all of our guests. In terms of, I just want to push you on a couple of points, but without delving into the issue of who did what and why, but the premise of what you're essentially saying is that if we go back to the initial design of the scheme in Northern Ireland, that if we had, or if those who made the decision had copied the GB scheme literally word for word, that would not have been fit for purpose for the condition in Northern Ireland. And arising from that the funding envelope in terms of AMI monies would not have been sufficient to cover what would have been the practical costs of implementation in Northern Ireland. Is that a fair summation of?
No, I don't agree with your first premise,
right,
that it wouldn't have been suitable. It would have put additional cost controls in that weren't here.
Right.
But I'm going to go back in
terms of the tariff levels, I mean,
yes,
and the tiered approach.
Yep.
Would that have been economically viable for all of the different sectors that are represented?
Yes, but the but is to answer the second part of your question. And I know this is complicated to get over without a drawing board and lots of, so I'm going to make this as simple as I can. We started off at 3% renewable heat. The intention was to go to 10% renewable heat. Sure. So we were trying to add in 7% renewable heat. We've gone to about 7. So we've gone up by 4 percentage points on our target, which was 7 percentage points. Okay, so we're about 60% of the way there.
Yeah.
And by doing that, we've overspent by a factor of 2. There's something very fundamentally wrong with the way in which the scheme was drawn up. How is that possible? I would love to see the original analysis, because if we're all producing more heat, why have we overspent on the budget? Can you understand this? This is quite critical. If we had a budget, somebody must have worked out how much money was in the piggy bank to fund this scheme to 2020 to get us to 10%. We've only gone to 7%, but we're overcommitted by a factor of 2 already, and we're only 60% of the way there. There's something fundamentally wrong with the way in which the original scheme was drawn up.
And indeed, obviously, this will be subject for the public inquiry to delve into, one of the various public inquiries that seem to be announced today, to go into. In a similar light, Michael, and maybe Tom as well in this particular one, if the conditions back in 2012 were such that this was a leap or a bigger step change of what was on offer, why have we seen a situation where the take-up was low initially and below budget, and then has, leaving aside the issue of what's been talked about in the media, but from the perspective of the sector, you then see a very rapid increase in terms of applications beyond 2015.
I'll ask Tom because he's in that sector.
Yeah. I'll take that one. I think there's probably 2 reasons for the slow uptake at the start. Number one, it wasn't promoted. Delhi didn't seem to be promoting this technology. We didn't really know about it. Most of us found out by word of mouth, and that takes time. Also, with boilers, there's a long lead time. You just don't go to a shop and buy a boiler and install it next week.
Tom, just for what's roughly the lead time for getting a boiler?
Anywhere from 6 to 10 weeks. Lead time from it in order till it's delivered. You have to construct a shed to put it in. That all takes time.
The lead-in time is actually considerably longer because you also have to get planning approval. So the actual lead-in time from deciding that you want to do something to getting it installed is more like 9 to 12 months.
Is that building control or planning approval, or a combination of both?
Planning and building control.
And building control.
So that was part of the reason for the slow uptake. Another thing that's an offshoot from that point, if the scheme was so lucrative, why did more people not come in earlier? Surely, by the slow uptake, proves this scheme wasn't cash cow that people think it is. And then touching on that point as well, the spike is obviously in the press. People's talking about this spike in applications. Were there a spike in applications of people signing the letter to report back to DFE last Tuesday? Did people leave it to the last day or two? It's human nature. And also what we're finding out on the ground concerning the boilers themselves, a lot of people had got a quotation from their installer to put a boiler in up to 2 years before the tariff changed. And a lot of people weren't convinced that this would work on their business. They weren't sure of the numbers. They were sitting on it. They were watching to see who else progressed. They sat for 1 year, 2 years on the fence. All of a sudden, Daddy announced there's going to be a date where the tariff changes. Those guys thought, right, we better go on ahead and get this done. So it doesn't cover the reason for all of the spike, but I believe that's a contributory factor to why that spike appeared at the end.
I just want to come back to the point about the divergence between Northern Ireland and GB. Obviously, we've a different economy and much larger farming sector, for instance, but we have a situation where, in essence, in GB, under their version of the scheme, they are living within the AME control figures. So we're not having a similar controversy there as we are as here. And appreciate, Michael, may not be the full way to the targets, but something really bizarre is going on here in the context that our overspend is more than twice the AME cover.
There's a fundamental difference between GB and Northern Ireland, and that's cheap natural gas. The guys in GB are able to put a 199 kilowatt boiler in, run it for 13, 14 hours, turn it off and go back to cheap natural gas to top up whatever requirement they still have. We didn't have access to that in 2013, 2014. It's starting to come in more now, but farms most certainly did not have access to cheap natural gas, and I believe that's one of the reasons why the tariff was set where it was at, and it was uncapped, as a recognition that we don't have access to a cheap alternative and we have a genuine high need for heat.
In the event that, leaving aside the whys and wherefores of it, if we had the tiered approach in place from day one, would we have seen a substantially different outcome in terms of where we are today, in terms of uptake of the scheme, taking into account your points around the marketing and the human nature of maybe people waiting to see how things pick up? Would we be in a fundamentally worse place today, or a much better place today, in terms of that tiering, in terms of how the industry would have responded to the situation?
I have an opinion. Yeah. The answer is yes. That's an opinion. I can't prove it. Yeah. But I think we would have had a more stable situation now without any overspend. That's an opinion.
Yes. This then goes, Michael, to the point as to what we're now doing is retrospectively trying to go back as best we can to perhaps what should have been put in place at the commencement of the scheme. Now, obviously, you can't simply wind the clock back and pretend what has happened hasn't happened, because people have made decisions based upon the scheme as then was. But if you can give us some sense of that, however, it gives us an indication as to the viability of essentially going back to that first principles in terms of the impact. Is it now a situation that it is a matter of the transition that is critical to yourselves, and obviously the consultation around matters, or the fundamentals of a tiered approach being something that is utterly counterproductive to your respective industries?
It's to do with the fact that the government contracted with people for 20 years based on a certain tariff, and are now tearing that up after 2 years. Right. And most people have made business decisions. There may be some people out there who actually aren't terribly affected. Right. But my guess is most of the businesses will be very seriously, and it's not just on the running of the boiler, it's on the knock-on effect that it has for the other investment that they put into their business. Yeah.
You could be devil's advocate here. You could separate out the issue of what is arguably bad faith on the part of government, what is a speculative point in relation to the knock-on impact in terms of the wider investment context, whether in renewables or further afield. But I think the critical thing is is the substance of the proposed changes of a nature that it fundamentally creates a problem for your industries?
Yes.
It is that as well?
Yes. Yes.
And right, in the context where we have, therefore, an overspend, reading through your documentation, you are focused very heavily on the issue of fraud and the tackling of fraud being the means by which we bring our budgets back in. The contrary argument that's put by the department is that the point others have mentioned already around excessive profits being the case. Am I correct in assessing that your emphasis is on the issue of fraud? However, if government has a view that there is excessive profits, do you have a different alternative approach in terms of a different financial model that would allow government to more efficiently recoup or to balance its budgets without doing as much potential damage to your respective industries as you're setting out?
I'll answer the second question first. No, we don't have a proposal on what those new tariffs should be. We've been in existence for 2 weeks, and as I've already said, it would be inappropriate for me now to suggest a different tariff scheme when there's been no consideration of it by our members within the industry, and I don't know what the financial implications are, the economic implications going forwards. Sorry, what was the first question?
I forgot myself in that regard. It's largely, we do accept that the issue is broader than simply that of fraud.
Oh, right.
That there is an issue
Yes.
of excessive profit.
Our stressing of fraud is not that we think that there's a lot of it out there.
Right.
Our stressing of it is that there's been so much negative publicity about ash for cash people.
Yes.
I don't think that it is that big, but by all means go and do the audits and throw the people out.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's going to recoup a lot of money, but let's get those out of the scheme
We're
first.
agreed on that one. That then just brings me neatly to the final point. Just invite you to make a comment on this, which is around the potential naming next week of the full list of recipients. Now, I'm aware of your current position is that you're opposed to that happening, but I want to put it to you that we are seeing still a drip feed of names coming forward, and clearly there is quite an hysterical reaction happening to individual cases. But in terms of what you would term getting ahead of the curve in terms of this, and there's a wider lesson for this situation over the past number of weeks. But in that spirit, do you see an argument actually that it would be both in the public interest but also in the interest of all the recipients for a single list to be published as soon as possible, rather than sort of death by a thousand cuts in terms of one name coming out, another name coming out, another accusation? That way you're actually getting ahead of the story as opposed to a situation where things are coming out piecemeal.
Okay, I'm not sure what the benefit is to the public to know who's received what amount of money when they don't know what the business is doing, what the overheads are, what the costs are, what the contribution to the economy is. So they're going to say, Mr A got £100,000 out of it this year and Mr B got £20,000. Mr A is the baddie. That'll be the perception. It is quite possible that Mr B was acting fraudulently and Mr A has got a business which is consuming all of the heat and he's doing everything dead right. So I don't see the benefit of putting that in the public domain.
But you also recognise, for example, CIP payments are subject to publication.
Yes.
And the point you make could be equally valid in that context as well. So why one and not the other?
In the current environment, there is so much negative publicity. We've had difficulties even getting some of the people to come here today to give evidence because they're putting their head above the parapet.
That's the point I was making, Michael. In terms of the negative publicity, which I agree is there and is problematic, I'm trying to suggest to you that there's an argument of saying get ahead of the curve, get the full list out, rather than over the next number of weeks, one name after another, and one headline after another emerging. If the whole list is published in one go, you actually can actually better manage the impact across the entire sector.
That's possible. I don't necessarily agree.
Okay.
We've said that do the audits, and once the audits have been carried out, and that when you can put the list of names out, and beside that you can say, tick, that guy is business case, technical case, so that if somebody's reading the list, somebody lifts up and says, he's fine, but everybody's also tarred with the one brush at the moment.
Michael, would you agree with that?
Yes, completely.
So, audit with names?
Audit, yes, after the audit, and we've said this all along. For the last 2 weeks since we've been in existence. Once the audits have been carried out, release the names and the monies. No issue with that whatsoever.
Okay. Gordon?
Thanks, Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation so far. Michael, I suppose a lot of it has been covered, but the objective, as I understand it, of the scheme was to encourage a switch to renewable energy. Would you agree with that?
Correct.
But is there a risk here that people were using this rather and it became an income generator for the business or for the farm? Is that a possible risk, though? And this is, I think, part of the perception out there, and it's something I think needs to be addressed.
Yeah, you're quite right, there's a perception. I don't think that's what drove most people. Most people might have seen it as an opportunity to expand their business. There may be a few people who just saw it as an opportunity to make some additional money. But you need to have an eligible use for your heat. And that's the critical bit. And that's why we're saying, in addition to technical audits, you need a business case audit. We heard earlier on from the speakers saying that they're not sure how to assess that. We're quite happy to chip in and give them advice. It's relatively easy to work out how much heat you need, what that process was doing, how much fuel did you use to consume all of that heat, and what was the product, and where are the invoices for the things that you sold, whether it's chickens or mushrooms or wood chip, whatever it is. That is auditable, and that will get rid of the fraud. I don't know the extent of the fraud. I don't think it's great, but that will take away the perception that ash for cash.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. What about the idea, and it's been talked about actually in the PAC, about the idea of the capital grant scheme for putting in these boilers? What would you have thought of that initially? I know it's long too late now, but what would you have thought of that principle?
Okay, I want to answer that as fast as I can because it also leads on to something else. Different, as the renewable energy industry progresses, you have different kinds of support mechanism. You basically have two. You've got an obligation or an incentive. An obligation is the stick, an incentive is the carrot to make you do something. At a very early stage of development, it's usual to use capital investment, so you give somebody a specific amount of money to do something. As an industry and a sector becomes more established, you normally move to an obligation or an incentive. If you had an obligation where there weren't any boilers, it wouldn't work. So you've got different kinds of policy intervention at different states of maturity. And one of the other things that the department failed to pick up on, irrespective of what scheme it is, whether it's renewable heat or renewable electricity, when you put break points into the tariff, that's where you incentivise the development in the market. So, for instance, in Northern Ireland, up to 250 kilowatts, you get a certain amount for ROCs. Above that, you get a lower tariff. You go around Northern Ireland, all of the farms all have 225 and 250 kilowatt wind turbines. There aren't any 80 kilowatt wind turbines. So the way in which you design the scheme, so for them to say earlier on that they thought most of them were going to be 50 kilowatts, but then they put in a 99 kilowatt, that is, and some clever jurisdictions, that's how you incentivise the market at that point. You incentivise the market at the break point. So I could have told them 5 years ago, if you put it in at 99, most of your boilers will be 99.
But is there, are the people that are here today and they're genuine business representatives, are they caught now with having to repay the capital cost? And you know, and that's still the burden. That's still the burden that they're left with. So the 12% return is not good enough in relation to that. You know, is that where the risk really is?
Well, I think you've highlighted, one of the major concerns. I've already indicated that many of the people who've invested in this technology are small businesses, so they've borrowed the money from banks and other finance sources to be able to install that. We're only a very short time into the repayment period of that, so the bulk of the loan is outstanding and accruing interest. And the business case that they used to go to the lender or to the banks, in some cases, for example, was based on the premise that they would derive some income from RHI as part of their normal business activity. And of course, the banks were written to by various ministers to say that this was a good scheme going forward, and this would be very supportive. So the banks would have taken a renewable view then when it was giving loans that this was, yeah.
And potentially, if there is misuse of the scheme, those guys who have misused the scheme will walk off and not matter if the bank comes and lifts those boilers. Whereas we still need heat.
Yeah.
We're going to have to pay our boilers off. You know, so the fraud guys will actually just not care about paying the banks potentially and come and lift the boilers.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Where somebody has built an expansion to their business on the back of this, and they now go back to the bank and say, sorry, I don't have the extra money, can't make the repayments, there are going to be defaults. What's going to happen in 2 or 3 years' time? At the moment, the department are not developing any new renewable energy policy. It's a very difficult place to be at the moment. We're all going to try and sort out the problem we've got at the moment. But let's say in 2 or 3 years' time, the Assembly comes up with, or the Executive comes up with a new support mechanism for renewable transport fuels. How much support are the banks going to give when they go, well, what happened back in 2017? The government just pulled the plug. This has got the decision. I agree, you've got to make a decision about something, but this has got implications, and you've got to think your way through the implications.
Right. Finally, Chair, just can you give us an indication, say in the poultry sector, what the running hours are of these boilers, and clarify this perception, or deal with a perception rather, that there is about people running in 24 hours. What is the average running time for a boiler?
As I said earlier on, I don't want to repeat myself, it's variable. It really depends on the size of the shed, the age of the shed, location. It also depends, there's men out there who have a small poultry shed who might be heating the hot water for their dairy as well. You cannot put a number on it.
But you know, we all heat our homes. It depends on some would heat our homes about 6 or 8 hours a day. You know, but you know, we don't heat our homes 24 hours a day.
Well, chickens need heat.
Yeah.
A chicken lives for 2 years.
Yeah.
We have it for 6 weeks. It's not even a teenager by the time it's leaving the farm. It needs heat. When the birds arrive on our farm, we need 35 degrees centigrade in that shed. On a December day in Northern Ireland, a 99 kilowatt boiler struggles to get there.
Don't know, not last December they didn't.
Only the previous years they have, but my point is poultry needs heat.
I appreciate that.
Through pretty much all of its life. Now,
constant heat, isn't it?
No,
constant dry heat.
It's a constant dry heat. The amount of heat will depend on the age of the bird and the outside climate. On a summer's day, and it's 25 degrees outside, we don't need heat.
Yeah.
But in summertime at 3 a.m. and it's 10 degrees, they still do need heat at a certain age. So to say there's a certain number of running hours, there's too many variables. What I do know is there's legislation there that if the poultry are out of the shed and the shed's empty and the doors are open, the heat has to be turned off. And anybody caught doing anything other than that has to be answerable. And we will not defend somebody burning heat unnecessarily. But when those birds go out, the heat's turned off, we have to go through the whole process of turnaround, mucking out, washing, all the rest. What we do need then is before the chicks arrive, those chicks arrive at day naught with us as day-old chicks. That shed has to be preheated for 48 hours before the birds arrive. You can't throw them into cold concrete.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
So, but poultry has always had a very high heat requirement.
Yeah.
And now something, it's a technical point, but to try and explain energy usage, when we had gas brooders inside our chicken sheds, it was a naked flame. I think everybody here will remember the old Supersair.
Yeah.
When you had a Supersair in your room, what had happened? Condensation ran off the walls, everything was wet. But you felt warmer at a lower temperature because of the humidity. Now that we've gone to hot water heating, which is effectively central heating, we need a higher temperature
to have the same effect,
to give the chicks the same, what you call a dry bulb temperature. So we can't even compare our energy usage pre-RHA and post-RHA on a straight line graph. There are multiple other factors that have to be taken into this. CAFRE report touched on it.
Yeah.
It's not perfect. It's based on one farm in England. There could be more work done.
Is this the one, sorry, is this the one that talked about the 99 kilowatt? The figures were for it, yeah, I've got it there. It was talking about the 388 kilowatt hour one.
Yes.
And if you run it for 45% of the time, isn't that right?
Yes.
Yeah, Caffrey figures. So, and you've covered it well. You wouldn't stand over those percentages. You don't think they're...
We have too many variables.
Too many variables.
You do not have an industry. The new sheds being built today, those green sheds we see in the country, hold 35 to 40,000 chickens.
They're very, very eco-friendly, though.
Very eco-friendly, but there's an awful volume of air to warm with a 99 kilowatt boiler. A new shed today, built post-RHI, will have between 200 and 300 kilowatt gas boiler to cover every eventuality in that shed.
Okay. On the mushroom side, then, have we any indication of the percentage time of running of the boilers?
Again, mushrooms are, again, have to be kept at certain temperatures at certain times. I don't know how many hours, but again, we would be probably, and again, this is an average, we've asked for figures from growers, but an average around the 375,000 kilowatt. But again, depending on the times of the year, that may vary. But again, I think several of our growers have had an off-time audit, and again, everything is computer controlled. You can see to the last tenth of a second what house was run at and when it was run at that. And again, we can't run a mushroom tunnel at 29 degrees or we'll have no mushrooms. There's, you know, it's been a very constant heat. It's allowed growers to use the energy efficiently, but not be afraid to use the energy to steam more, to reduce disease levels, because it's a renewable heat source. So increasing that steaming, that previously the cost would have been prohibitive, they've had more steaming, so we've actually reduced their level of disease instance on the farm, improved their quality.
Improves biosecurity and all the rest of it.
Absolutely.
I think, Chair, we're all agreed then, it's the use is fine, it's the abuse is the problem, and it has to be tackled. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Gordon. Sinead, just a quick one.
Yeah, it was just on that gas. I wasn't just, I didn't really quite catch that, Tom. You were saying that in England they have access to affordable cheap gas, and as opposed to ourselves. And therefore, I would have thought in that instance then, would it not have been harder to incentivise those users in England to take up such a scheme? And therefore, if anything, it would have been there that would have been lifting tariffs and caps, and here they would have more reason to apply.
I don't know the numbers
Correct
behind,
my logic here.
I don't know the numbers behind the reason for the GB tariff was set. Maybe that's why it was set at 9p as opposed to 6p or 5.9p. Maybe that was the reason behind that, to get the early adopters in quickly. I just know part of the reasoning within our tariff, there was natural gas was mentioned as a contributing factor. It's a facility we didn't have.
I just don't get that. You know, if anything, the reverse seems true to me. I just... Anybody?
I don't know the reason.
I don't think the uptake in the poultry industry in GB, in percentage terms, has been as high as it has been here because of natural gas. It's back to incentivising behavioural change. If you're what's called the counterfactual fuel, it's the one that you started off with, whether it's oil or gas. If that is terribly expensive, then it's not difficult to incentivise something which is cheaper or at a similar price. But if the fossil fuel price has gone down, which Tom explained earlier on, and you're trying to incentivise to move away from a fossil fuel which is cheaper, then your incentive has to go up, or nobody will switch. They'll just stick with the fossil. Does that answer you?
No, it doesn't, because we're saying that in England they had access to cheaper, affordable gas.
Yes.
Here, we didn't have access to that.
That's correct.
And the First Minister said, so obviously the two schemes didn't match, so they lifted the caps and the tariffs. Now, from my logic, if you have access to cheap and affordable gas, it's going to be more difficult for me to convince you to be incentivised by this scheme. So therefore, you could understand that they may have lifted the tariffs and caps.
Yes.
But when you're in Northern Ireland and you don't have access to cheap and affordable gas, surely then it would follow that the tariffs and caps would be less of a barrier.
No, the incentive in Northern Ireland has to be higher if the gas and the oil is more expensive.
The margin.
Yeah.
No margin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Beg to differ.
Thank you very much indeed. Michael, Tom, Elaine, John, thank you very much indeed, and thank you very much indeed for the short notice. We appreciate you've just recently been formed. We appreciate we've asked very difficult questions and asked for data sets that haven't been available and the rest of it. But please, while we're still our committee, please keep us informed of what's going on and there's issues to do with that. But thank you very much indeed for your time, and thank you very much indeed for providing us with a lot of information. I'm not sure we understand much more, but thank you very much indeed for that information, and it's given me a lot of food for thought going forward. But thank you very much indeed. No, thank you. Thank you. Committee, just one of the potential actions that come out about that is the look for an economic impact assessment. I know it's very short notice, but I think one of the things we should be asking the department is to look at the economic impact assessment across sort of various businesses. It's not going to be done in time for this, but we do need to be having a look at the economic impact assessment of what we're doing.
Chair, if I can suggest that if any rights to the department now to flag it up as an issue and seek the view of the Minister and Permanent Secretary then on Monday when they come in again as to how quickly and expeditiously that can be done.
Yeah.
Reflecting
also flag up to them that they should verbally address the issue if it's not overtly addressed.
That's what we're looking for. Yeah, I know we're not going to have time for a full detailed report, but it's quite clear. We've heard some substantial figures there from an agribusiness sector. Yeah. So we need to. One of the things we need to do before in our decision-making process is to make sure we understand the economic impact. Stephen?
Just want to confirm with Peter, I mean, that as a statutory rule, this is simply an up and down vote in the Assembly. There isn't the scope for a different approach to be taken. The only proposal on the table can be what the department proposes, and all of the department wants.
If things rule the way they were, and it's simply a case of getting back into the debate that was suspended, then yes, it's still the SR as it is. And that's really what members are going to be asked to make a judgment on whether or not they wish to approve that SR.
I'm not suggesting I have any bright ideas in my head necessarily on this one, but procedurally, if the Minister then begged for leave to withdraw on Monday and asked the Business Committee to re-table a different SR on Tuesday, that is technically possible if something... Technically,
setting aside, I have an insufficient knowledge of the workings of the Business Committee's timings, but technically, I think that's possible.
Yeah, I haven't a counter proposal to make as such, but just wanted to...
I think technically...
Yeah, but there's a lot of information here.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've, first of all, just before we finish up and say date and time of next meeting, Monday 9:30 here in room 29. May I thank you, Peter, and the team for what can only be said is an exceptional piece of work in getting it done. And I would quite like to, again, pass our thanks on to the Permanent Secretary and also to Michael Doran and the team for going through.
Chair, can I also thank Hansard, who once again have come through in a very tight time scale for us, and that is not always easy because they've had a lot on this week so far. So I just wanted to put that on record.
And just one final thing to put on record. Thank you very much indeed for a very cooperative and informative session, and thank you all for being fully involved.
Well done.
Okay.
Still not getting any substitution pay. Right.
Is the Northern Ireland Assembly